Hey everyone, What If Fan here, bringing you another exciting part of What If Transmigrated in Bleach World. You can find the fanfic title and the original author's name on my Patreon page. Make sure to check it out and show them some love. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Also check out my Patreon channel for early releases of all the series, where you can find all the series released one day ahead of YouTube. Alright, let's jump into it. Chapter 136, Ichigo Kurosaki is overwhelmed, and Grimmjow discovers his prey. After saying that, he waved his hand, and the guards with extremely distorted faces wielded hexagonal staffs and rushed towards the sages who had spoken most fiercely. He had long disliked those old men, and they should have died long ago. Although the guards were unwilling in their hearts, they obeyed the orders of the noble masters and were full of yearning and respect. However, they still raised the staffs representing law and justice and swung them fiercely at those noble masters. The scene was very bloody. How dare you! Until they died, the corrupt nobles were still puzzled. They didn't understand why Shiroha would really kill them. Before, they used the same method to persecute those Shinigami. But none of those Shinigami dared to resist, and all of them died obediently. Even if you give those Shinigami 10 times the courage, those weaklings still wouldn't dare attack them, the nobles. So, they gradually became presumptuous and took it for granted that they could rely on rules and justice to punish anyone. They didn't expect that someone would dare to resist, or use such cruel means. Isn't it just that you were wronged? Can't you die obediently for the overall situation and for Soul Society? But they would never have the opportunity to figure this out. Because as the staff was swung down, their heads were shattered. Looking at the corrupt nobles who died with their eyes open, Shiroha clapped his hands and smiled. The air is much fresher now. The world was a large playground for him, and he was a fun-loving person. Although many people harbored malice or fear towards him, in his eyes, these people were all clowns. No matter how hard they tried, he would just smile and crush them easily. For example, Central 46 had never figured out the overall situation and had no self-awareness. In their view, they were using their power in the Spirit King Palace to judge him. This was their rule of the game and their strongest trump card. However, these were nothing to Shiroha. Whether it was the nobles themselves or their ridiculous rules, in his eyes, they had no meaning, like spider silk that would collapse at the touch of a finger. Seeing the tragic death of their colleagues, the originally arrogant sages immediately became cowardly, crying and begging for mercy. "We are sorry. Spare us. Commander, we were wrong. We will never bother you again." Looking at this group of maggots that were worse than cowardly bandits, Shiroha shook his head and said, "It's really disappointing. You don't even have the qualifications to die by my hands. I don't get why Gotei 13 are willing to be ruled by you. It's really stupid. Shinigami, it's ridiculous." In fact, with the strength of Yamamoto, as long as he had the will, he could send this group of nobles to hell. It's just that old man Yama was soft-hearted. Thousands of years ago, the Captain Commander was a different man. When he unleashed his Ryujin Jaka, he even struck down his own people, and he wasn't afraid of collateral damage. The Captain Commander now has a soft heart, otherwise these nobles wouldn't dare to order him around. On the surface, the nobles also occupy the moral high ground. Such a system is fundamentally deformed. In addition, the Shinigami themselves have problems. In his opinion, the values of Soul Society's Shinigami are of course much better than those of illiterate pirates, and they are also better than those shinobi. But compared with normal people, they're still not normal. Their minds are shackled, and the truth they believe in is, from beginning to end, just a joke. From the very beginning, they were trained as tools. After all, the duty of the Shinigami is not only to kill hollows but also to ensure the balance of the world and to protect the One King and Five Dukes to the death. The so-called One King and Five Dukes refers to the Spirit King and the 5 great noble houses. These are all written in the freshman handbook of the Shino Academy. Such Shinigami are a joke in his eyes. However, if these Shinigami simply serve him as tools, they are very suitable. As Shiroha's cold eyes swept over, almost all the sages stood up involuntarily. In the face of death, everyone is equal. Today, they have seen what a real Shinigami is. The glory and majesty of the past have all been thrown behind them. Now they dare not even breathe, truly realizing their own weakness. Shiroha nodded with satisfaction and said, "It seems that you finally realized that you don't have a trump card in your hand. All what you are doing is meaningless, let us sit down and talk." Hearing this, the sages breathed a sigh of relief and slowly sat down. Driven by the instinct of survival, they gave in. "You guys really want to sit down?" Shiroha raised his eyebrows. The sages trembled and turned pale at his joke. Most of the sages were sitting uncomfortably and looked lost. Seeing this, Shiroha shook his head and said, "It seems that you are really hopeless. Not to mention as leaders, even as soul, you are unqualified." However, he also noticed that the sages of the Shihuan family and the Kuchiki family were still able to remain calm. As members of the four great noble houses, these people still had some dignity. Moreover, these two families were barely allies of his, so these people had confidence. The other young, dignified, and beautiful girl also performed well, at least she wasn't shaking so badly. Shiroha glanced at her and thought to himself, Amakado Nayura? It's still possible to save her. He knew this girl. She was the only direct heir of the upper noble Amakado family. After Aizen massacred Central 46, she inherited her father's seat and became the Central 46 member. Before that, she is the librarian of the Great Spirit Book Archive. Shiroha remembered that she was a reformist like Kairaku. He wasn't impressed by reformists. He looked down on lukewarm approaches, and he didn't have the time to slowly change the customs and rules of Soul Society. Of course, he didn't mind recruiting these people for his own use. There was still a long time in the future, and the more people serving him, the better. At this time, Nayura was just pretending to be calm. Her legs are trembling violently. In fact, she had always been dissatisfied with the practices and ideas of her parents. It's just that she was powerless to change, nor did she have the courage to change. In addition, she also had a kind of condescending pity and superiority complex towards those of lower status. Before today, she didn't think there was anything wrong with this. After all, she was indeed the stronger party. Until a man named Uehara Shiroha easily took the lives of several nobles. Then, everything changed. She and other nobles realized that they had always been weak. It turned out that in the face of absolute strength, their proud status, identity, and noble bloodline were completely meaningless. After realizing this, Nayura changed her mind. She awakened. Finally, she looked at Shiroha's upright back as he left, and there was even a bit of gratitude and admiration in her eyes. At this moment, Ichigo Kurosaki was not in such a good mood. After the battle in Soul Society, he thought he had grown and could protect his family. Who would have thought that he himself was the source of danger? The power of the hollow in his body was getting stronger and stronger, and it would whisper crazy words in his ear for no reason. He didn't want to become a monster, didn't want to be hated, and didn't want to hurt others unintentionally. But even so, Ichigo still used this terrible power. Although this would bring him one step closer to becoming a monster. But he had no choice, because his power was limited and he couldn't defeat the extremely powerful Arrancar in front of him. He must protect his friend, and this required great strength. In an instant, a strange red and white hollow mask appeared on Ichigo's face. At the same time, the Ryatsu around his body quickly intensified, becoming extremely heavy, mixed, and cold. Prey found. Looking at the sudden change in the momentum of the Shinigami in front of him, Grimmjow's eyes lit up. Ichigo, who was overpowered by the hollow, burst out with amazing fighting power. A highly compressed and powerful Ryatsu condensed on the tip of the Zangetsu blade. He swung the blade forward quickly, and a huge slash like a black crescent was released from the tip of the blade, Getsuga Tensho. After releasing the killing move, the mask on his face immediately shattered. After experiencing the oppression of the five elements barrier, Ichigo's control over the power of the hollow became a little stronger. But even so, his mask only lasted for a moment. On the one hand, it was because he did not have enough control over the power of the hollow, on the other hand, he did not enter his inner world to confront it. In his opinion, using the power of the hollow was equivalent to becoming a monster. Moreover, the hollow was threatening him for no reason, and Ichigo had already determined that the other party was a monster. Facing the killing move suddenly released by Ichigo, Grimmjow crossed his hands and used Hiyaro and Ryatsu to defend against this move. However, his hands still became injured. He looked at Ichigo with some surprise, and his expression became more excited. "This move is pretty good. It seems that you are worth being killed by me." As soon as Grimmjow finished speaking, Ichigo half-knelt on the ground with an unwilling look on his face. His face was pale and he was panting, looking like he was overdrawn. The consumption of Ryatsu and physical strength was nothing to him, but the consumption of mental strength and will was the most fatal. When the mind is disturbed, the person and the sword will become dull. Grimmjow noticed this and shook his head and said, "It seems that you can't control your power perfectly. You should not be able to use this move many times, or even only once. What a pity! But the result is not different, you are destined to die by my hands." In the distance at the Karakura Town T-gun base, Shiroa clearly sensed the scene with his observation haki. He shook his head secretly. Compared to the original plot, Ichigo has indeed grown. After all, in the plot, this kid was suppressed and beaten throughout the battle, and even Grimmjow was not hurt. It seems that the previous beating was not in vain. However, it is still not enough. Ichigo, you need to feel more pain. Talent, strength, opportunity, Ichigo had all of them. What this kid lacked was combat experience and spiritual growth. As for the understanding and application of instinct, Ichigo was extremely unqualified. Shiroa felt it necessary to wake this kid up. Of course, his main purpose was definitely not to take this opportunity to beat up the protagonist and stretch his muscles. He didn't have such bad taste. The following development was the same as in the plot. The other Shinigami solved their opponents separately. This time, because of the occasional guidance from Shiroa, Ranjaku and Rukia performed much better, and both solved their enemies neatly. And with the limit that had been lifted, Toshiro, who fully activated his Bankai, also successfully took down the Arrancar Shalon. On the surface, Toshiro was eager to end the battle because the ice flowers in the air were about to wither. Shalon speculated that when all these ice flowers withered, the Bankai, Daiguren Hyarinmaru, would be lifted. In other words, these ice flowers represented the duration of Hyarinmaru's Bankai. This speculation cannot be said to be very accurate, it can only be said to be naive and ridiculous. In fact, when all the ice flowers wither, Daiguren Hyarinmaru will not disappear, but will enter the second stage, which is the true Bankai. At that time, Hyarinmaru can freeze all elements and all erasure, which is considered absolute freezing. In the 1,000-Year Blood War, even Gerard, who was powerful and opened the perfect Quincy Volstandig, was frozen by Hyarinmaru's true Bankai. However, this state consumes too much energy, and the current Toshiro can't bear it at all. So Toshiro needed to end the battle before all the ice flowers withered. In the eyes of Shiroa, Toshiro's talent and strength were not weak, and Hyarinmaru had infinite potential. After a few hundred years or 1,000 years, he would have the opportunity to grow into the level of a top captain. His potential and strength were worthy of the reputation of a genius child. It's a pity that there was not much time left for him to grow. Therefore, in the plot, facing the top powerhouses, Toshiro could only be defeated. And as several Shinigami lifted the Genti Kaijo that restricted their Ryatsu, the hollows brought by Grimmjow also fell to the street. At this time, Grimmjow was ready to show his skills to finish off his opponent. At this moment, a black garganta opened in the air, and Tozen came out and took away Grimmjow, who had acted without authorization. Only Ichigo was left there, helpless and unwilling. In the dark room, Grimmjow put his hands in his pockets and followed Tozen Kaname to Las Noches with Sonido. On the surface, he was very calm, and it seemed that he didn't take this setback to heart at all. But deep down, his mood was very complicated. This time, he had run away. He wanted to prove that Ulquiorra's practice of letting the tiger go back to the mountain was wrong. So, he brought a group to the human world. According to his plan, all humans with Ryuryuko were targets. As long as they were killed, then whether it was Ichigo Kurosaki or any other threats, they would all disappear. This would prove that he was right. Only he, Grimjow, was qualified to be the king. He wanted to be the king standing on the bones. The good news was that he completed the first half of the sentence and stood on the bones. The bad news was that they were all the bones of his companions. In this action, he lost a group of loyal members, and there was no other gain. None of the Shinigami were defeated. At this time, Grimjow's mentality was starting to break. However, he could only go all the way to the end. Anyway, no matter what, he had to defeat that Ichigo. Because there was no turning back. In an unusually silent atmosphere, Tozen brought Grimjow to Aizen's throne room. Aizen, sitting high on the throne, still looked calm and composed, as if he didn't take the matter to heart at all. Seeing Aizen's look, Grimjow took Tozen even less seriously. This blind man said that Aizen was furious. Isn't this just like nothing happened? He was making a fuss, bluffing, just a mean person. Although he couldn't see Grimjow's rebellious look. But Tozen still sensed something. He frowned and said in a cold voice, "Grimjow, you disobeyed Lord Aizen's orders and acted on your own, resulting in the loss of precious combat power. You should have something to say to Lord Aizen about this, right?" Grimjow had already given up a bit. Chapter 137, The Arrancar's Defeat and Grimjow's unable to express his suffering. Moreover, he didn't take this blind man who kept talking about justice and order seriously. He was the king and shouldn't be afraid of anyone. Although Grimjow was indeed afraid of the strength of Aizen and the three Espada. However, he had been trying to cover up this fact, even lying to himself, and was very arrogant when facing Aizen. At this time, facing Tozen's questioning, Grimjow put his hands in his pockets with his nose in the air, and said in a matter-of-fact and arrogant tone, "No. I have nothing to say." "You." Tozen's already dark face turned even darker. Aizen, seated high on the throne, said calmly. Although Grimjow's action was very reckless and caused losses. But it also showed precious loyalty. "Grimjow, you took action without authorization because of your loyalty to me, right?" In just a few words, he had already determined the nature of the matter. No matter what the reason was, Grimjow had made a mistake. Although Grimjow was also a good combat asset. But for a pawn like this, as long as the Hogyoku was exerted, there would be as many as needed. Therefore, Aizen didn't take him seriously at all. He was even too lazy to remind him or listen to his explanation. Grimjow was just a small figure, and his life and death were insignificant, merely used to kill time. Tozen would handle the rest of the matter. In this regard, Grimjow, who was unaware, laughed and said, "Yes, Lord Aizen is right, that's it." In his opinion, this Aizen didn't seem very smart. He was fooled so easily. It was too easy. Aizen was amused by this. Hearing Grimjow's undisguised smug laughter, Tozen couldn't bear it any longer and grabbed his collar directly. "Grimjow, you are so disrespectful to Lord Aizen. Lord Aizen, please allow me to punish him." "Well." Aizen pretended to be conflicted and deliberately didn't say the rest of the words. However, he didn't reject Tozen's proposal. Grimjow didn't know he had fallen into a trap. He still thought Aizen really valued him and stood on his side. Therefore, he was sure that Tozen would not dare to make a move, and said arrogantly, "Are you holding a grudge against me? You're worried that I'll take your position away from you, so you're so anxious. Commander, don't you always talk about justice and order? Isn't this wrong?" "Yes, justice." While speaking, Tozen held Suzamushi, secretly condensed his Ryatsu, and said in a cold voice, "Killing without justice is just killing. Killing for justice is justice. Your actions are pure killing, which will only destroy the order of Las Noches. For the sake of Lord Aizen, you must be punished." As he spoke, a flash of cold light appeared, and he had already cut off Grimjow's right arm with one swing. At the same time, he immediately activated a Hado, burning the severed arm into ashes. "You bastard!" Grimjow was furious. He didn't have the ability to regenerate. Once his arm was gone, it was gone. Moreover, his arm was burned to ashes. Even if he asked that freak scientist, it would be difficult to restore it. Therefore, he rushed towards Tozen with his hand on his Zanpakuto, roaring, "I'm going to kill you." At this time, Aizen, who had been silent, spoke again. "Grimjow, let's forget what happened before. If you make the same mistake again, I won't be able to forgive you. Do you understand?" He didn't use much force when he spoke, just a little bit of ryatsu and momentum. His expression was just a little solemn. But even so, Grimjow still felt enormous pressure. He stood there in a daze, holding the hilt of the sword with his left hand, but he didn't draw it. Deep down, he was very unconvinced. "He allowed to cut me, and I am not allowed to fight back." "That's not what you said just now." "It's absurd. It's too much." Then, he understood. It turned out that he was a clown from beginning to end. No one took him seriously at all. After realizing this, Grimjow chose to follow his instincts even though he was furious. He turned and left Aizen's palace, leaving only a somewhat sad figure behind. Aizen and Tozen had cooperated tacitly and dealt with Grimjow completely. It was obvious that the two of them were engaged in a Shinigami clique and workplace bullying. However, reason and righteousness stood on their side. Grimjow was a dumb person eating bitterness but couldn't express his suffering. Other hollows would not stand on Grimjow's side, and everything was his own fault. Aizen used this workplace PUA technique to perfection. Regarding this, Jin, who met Aizen at the window, also made a sharp comment. "You are such a bad person. From the beginning, you knew what was going to happen next. Grimjow was played by you from beginning to end." "Is that so?" Aizen remained non-committal. Jin continued, "Is it okay to lose 5 Aaron cards at once?" He wanted to test what cards Aizen had. "No problem at all, they're just the lowest level of numeros. I can always create more." Having said this, Aizen glanced at the ever-changing barren desert of Hueco Mundo and continued. "As long as we gather the 10 Espada, our plan will go smoothly. The Vasto Lord class Arrancar is the real fighting force." 10 Espadas? Thinking of the group of Arrancars, an inexplicable light flashed in Jin's eyes. In Soul Society, after a thorough investigation, the technical staff of the Department of Research and Development found the catalog of materials that Aizen had read in the Great Spirit Book Archive. Using instruments, they detected the residual ryatsu left by Aizen in the materials. Yukatake browsed through the items of confidential materials and found a clue. He found that almost all the secret materials were related to the Hogyoku. Among them was the technology to extract the Hogyoku from a soul. But there was only one exception, and that was the Oken. The manufacturing technique for the Oken has always been a taboo. Even he had no right to view the detailed content. So, he immediately reported this information. When seeing the report, Central 46 panicked first. There were still people among them who understood. Even those who didn't understand before, after being beaten up by Aizen and Shiroa, had now learned their lesson. They now understood that the means and power that were always successful in the past were ineffective against these two people. They really dared to overturn the table. And when Aizen was a captain of the Gotei 13, he dared to slaughter them all. If they were really beaten to the Soul King Palace by him, they might as well just kill themselves. So all of a sudden, they became honest and chose to delegate power to the Gotei 13 and the T-gun. In this regard, Nayura was actually very disappointed. Now she understood. Identity, status, and orthodox bloodline were all useless. Even when facing a catastrophe, they would only pin their hopes on others, without any idea of self-help and self-improvement. Shiroa was right, these people were insects, they were all trash. Apart from bullying the weak and fearing the strong, they couldn't do anything else, there was no hope. Yamamoto also got the news. After learning Aizen's purpose, he immediately convened an emergency captain meeting. After hearing that Aizen wanted to create the Oken and attack Squad Zero and even the Soul King, all the captains fell silent. They knew that Aizen was aiming big, but they didn't expect him to be so bold that he would actually target the Soul King with one strike. This was simply audacious. Of course, there were also a few captains who didn't like the Soul King. For example, Mayuri Kuratsuchi, who had been resurrected with full power and had become stronger. He had no respect for the Soul King at all. In other words, the time when he would respect the Soul King the most would be the moment he put him on the dissection table. At that time, he would pay the highest respect to the Soul King. As for Kenpachi, he didn't care at all. Now he just wanted to cut down Ichigo and then continue to challenge Shiroha. Kayaraku secretly said. Aizen actually wants to attack the Soul King Palace. This is just as Brother Shiroha predicted. Things are getting tricky. With his position, he knew some confidential information. Therefore, he knew that creating the Okan required the sacrifice of the souls of the entire Karakura town. At that time, all life in the Jirichi would be wiped out. For this reason, they must do a good job to protect it. This was not easy. If the incident happened in Soul Society, it would be okay, but in the world of the living, the Gotei 13's control was not that strong. And because the world of the living was too fragile, they couldn't defend it with heavy troops. Karakura town was not an ideal battlefield. It's really treasonous, Suifeng said bitterly. I will definitely kill Aizen. She was relieved at the same time as she was angry. Originally, she was a little worried about Shiroha. After all, he had offended the new Central 46 badly. However, at the Noble Families Conference, the Kuchiki family and the Shihoin family supported Shiroha and the T-gun. Therefore, the punishment had not been imposed. In addition, the current situation was special, and it was estimated that Central 46 would also calm down. For the time being, Shiroha was safe. Of course, Suifeng was really angry about what Aizen did, and hated it very much. After hearing the news, Byakuya said nothing, but his eyes became extremely sharp. He would defend Karakura town and the honor of the nobles to the death. Originally, he should have defended the rules of Soul Society. But not long ago, he chose to stand on the side of Shiroha who broke the rules. In fact, he didn't like Shiroha who broke the rules, nor did he want to stand up for him. But Rukia liked him, so he had no choice. Feeling guilty about Rukia, he had to go against his principles again and speak for Shiroha. His beloved sister ran away with someone, and he had to say good things for this guy. This taste was so sour. Now Byakuya wanted to use Senbonzakura to chop the Arankar and the three traitors into pieces immediately. In the end, Yamamoto swung his cane and gave an order. In order to create the Okan, Aizen will definitely attack Karakura town. The Department of Research and Development and the 12th Division must always pay attention to the situation over there. In addition, report the situation to Captain Hitsugaya in Karakura town and ask them to be prepared. However, he also knew that Karakura town was not suitable as a battlefield. If they fought the enemy there, it would be very disadvantageous for them. Therefore, they must be prepared and must do a good job of defense. In fact, all the captains had a doubt in their hearts, but they did not ask it. That is, at this critical moment, where was Shiroha? The war was about to break out. As a top-level combat force, was Commander Uehara still slacking off? Yes, Shiroha was slacking off, and he was very happy. Because it was related to the Soul King, Soul Society was a little nervous. However, he knew very well. For now, Aizen really couldn't beat Squad Zero. After all, the incomplete Soul King was not completely a decoration. Aizen's chances of winning were really slim. Moreover, the newly unsealed Hogyoku could not be used infinitely, and it was not in the best condition. So Aizen couldn't fuse with the Hogyoku immediately. It was originally half a year before the Hogyoku would reach its perfect form. But then Princess Oraheim would lend a helping hand to Aizen. The power of the Hogyoku would be triggered in advance. So there was not much time left for Ichigo, Urahara, and the Gotei 13. But this had nothing to do with Shiroha. Be it Aizen or the Soul King, they should die and be destroyed, he didn't care. At this time, he was touring Karakura town with Mishabane Ora. It had to be said that the jigai made by Urahara was very good. This jigai could not only bring out the unparalleled temperament of Shiroha, but it was also very comfortable to wear, and could provide better enjoyment. Without the Jigai, some of the enjoyment of the world would be discounted, and it was inevitable that it would be a little unsatisfactory. On the streets of Karakura town, a man and a woman with outstanding temperament and amazing looks, so the rate of turning heads was also amazingly high. But both of them were cloaked with Ryatsu deterrence. Passers-by would subconsciously ignore the two after seeing them. Compared to Shiroa, Ichigo's life was not so good. He was under great pressure. On the one hand, Aizen and the Arrancar were eyeing him covetously, making him unable to sleep or eat. In addition to external threats, he also had big internal problems. The monster called Hollow was becoming more and more arrogant and powerful. He still remembered the two disastrous defeats against the Arrancar. Without the Hollow, he might have died long ago. This made him feel more and more insignificant and helpless, and he was more afraid of the Hollow. However, without power, he couldn't protect anyone. So in the end, Ichigo still came to the base of the Visored. Facing a group of extraordinary masked soldiers, he was not afraid at all, and spoke arrogantly. "I have decided that I will learn the techniques of controlling the Hollow from you. However, I will not join you. I am not the same as you. I want to be a Shinigami." "You are such a stubborn kid." After complaining, Shinji asked helplessly. "Then, may I ask, why should we agree to such a useless thing?" This kid was too rude. The atmosphere had been set to this point, and he still wanted to get free lessons from them. It was really like spending money without buying the main item. However, the Visored were not too angry about this. After all, for them, the most important thing at the moment was to defeat Aizen. This was both for revenge and for self-protection. With Aizen, the venomous snake around, they had to be careful when going out, for fear that Aizen would come to their door and then put them on the test bench again. Ichigo had the same trouble as them, and this was the basis of cooperation. Hearing Shinji's question, Ichigo took out the substitute Shinigami badge, then changed into his Shinigami form, and shouted. "Just based on this. If you don't agree, I will beat you until you agree." After saying that, he waved Zangetsu and rushed towards Shinji with a determined look. The two fought. However, the Visored next to them could see that the two fought vigorously, but in fact, they did not use their full strength. Needless to say, Shinji did not wear his mask to use the power of Hollow, nor did he release his Zanpakuto into Shirkai or Bankai. As for the orange-haired boy, although his expression and tone were very fierce. But when he attacked, he was soft and timid, as if he was afraid of something. Chapter 138, Aizen's Oken Plan, Karakura Town in Danger. Lisa was puzzled and said. Didn't this kid see that Shinji was holding back? What on earth was he afraid of? It turns out that he is only good at talking. Love looked disappointed. Even Kensei shook his head repeatedly. That's not the way to fight. That's too unmanly. Rojuro frowned with a melancholy face, and was also a little puzzled. Looking at the two cowardly people, Hiyori, who was watching, became more and more angry. After a while, her anger bar was finally full. Then, she hit the unhelpful Shinji with a slipper and yelled. You Vlandi, you have little ability but a big mouth, let me see what you are capable of. If you keep shrinking like this, there is no way you can join us. Hachi, please set up 5 more barriers. As she spoke, she rushed towards the confused Ichigo. Hiyori had been very angry recently. She was beaten for no reason, and was absolutely crushed. She was angry but couldn't vent. As a hot-tempered delinquent, she felt very uncomfortable. It happened that Ichigo came to their door, and she was going to practice on him and vent her frustration. At the beginning, it was pretty good. Hiyori, who used her hollow mask, suppressed Ichigo. In fact, in terms of raw power and strength, Ichigo had the advantage. It's just that he cared too much about the hollow in his body, and he couldn't let all of his power out during the battle. He couldn't even exert 50% of his strength. It would be strange if he could win. As they fought, the two of them grew excited. The blows became heavier and heavier. Ichigo swore in his heart that he would never give his soul to a hollow, so he became weaker and weaker as the battle went on. He was beaten back again and again, and even became a little dizzy. Hiyori was too heavy-handed. Coupled with the stimulation of the power of the hollow, White also wanted to kill, and instantly eroded Ichigo's consciousness. So Ichigo put on the mask of the hollow, and the epic hybrid was online again. A heavy Ryatsu enveloped the surroundings, shocking everyone. At this time, Hiyori, who was in the heat of the fight, did not realize the seriousness of the matter. She thought this kid was just SOSO. Then with just one move, White pressed Hiyori's throat against the wall, and then pinned her against it, choking her so hard that she was about to lose consciousness. Fortunately, several visored nearby saw that things were not going well, and immediately came over and subdued the mad hollow together. After this friendly exchange, several visored also recognized Ichigo's potential. They first made Ichigo use up all his Ryatsu and reach his limit. After that, they took him to a huge underground base and set up many protective barriers. Here, Ichigo, who was exhausted and at his limit, began to learn how to control the hollow in his body. In the underground base of the visored in Karakura town, Ichigo began to lose control. He was covered with white bone armor, and his right hand turned into a white claw. Shinji and several other visored treated it as a serious threat and started to take turns fighting him in order to delay the time for him to completely hollowify. However, this was all they could do. The battle in the outside world was irrelevant to the overall situation. The battle in Ichigo's inner world was the key. Only by defeating the monster deep in his heart could he control the hollowification and become a true visored. At this time, in his inner world, Ichigo and White were fighting. In the battle, Ichigo had no advantage and was suppressed by White. The opponent spun Zangetsu into the air, leaving him overwhelmed. With the help of his observation haki and the power of the mind gem, Shiroa invaded Ichigo's inner world and began to watch the battle. He heard those classic dialogues. Ichigo, what is the key to deciding the king and the horse? It's instinct. How can a sword in its sheath kill people? Shiroha knew that the last sentence was crucial. To some extent, the final boss Yawatch died because of this sentence. But now Ichigo didn't understand the deep meaning of it at all. It was not easy for him to hear what White said. After all, he was deaf and blind and could neither recognize other people's faces nor hear other people's voices. He didn't even think that White was on his side. White's performance was like flirting with a blind man, and it was all in vain. The only thing Ichigo remembered was White's last warning. I will always keep an eye on you, and if you are not careful, I will take over your body. So try your best to stay alive. He felt threatened. Therefore, he wanted to completely control the hollow, and suppress the hollow in his body. Fortunately, after completing this hollow control training, he was finally able to hollowify in a sober state, and he had initially mastered the power of the hollow. But his hollow time was limited. Next, Shinji and others began to take turns fighting Ichigo to help him train in hollow control. After a battle, they understood Ichigo's current limit of hollowification. It's really hard to improve. Shinji scratched his head. It can only last for 4 seconds, which is too short. It seems that this hollowification control training cannot stop. So, why does Berry-tan need to undergo such training? Mashiro, who was lying on the ground, asked innocently. Kensei said casually, it's just a training to control the hollow. We have all done it. How could you not know? Shinji explained. Mashiro really didn't know. Because she could maintain the hollowified state for 15 hours from the beginning, no one could match her. Therefore, she didn't need to practice this at all. Stupid Kensei, you don't even know this. Mashiro looked very proud. Kensei said as a matter of course, how could I remember such a thing? It's not important at all. What did you just say, you wild girl? It's really not easy. Rojuro looked at Ichigo who was fighting with Hiyori with a serious expression. Except for the first attack after the transformation, which was slow, his transformation was impeccable. It took such a short time to gain such strength. The hollow in his body is more powerful than we thought. Well, it was that guy who did it. The seemingly harmless face of Aizen flashed before Shinji's eyes. They had also known about the strange hollow in Naruki City. They knew that the strange hollow was the product of Aizen's experiment. It was just that they did not intervene in order to hide themselves. They also knew that the hollow was very unusual. Therefore, they knew that Ichigo had great potential. Kensei looked solemn. This kid is really unusual. He has some amazing qualities in his normal state. During the battle, Ichigo showed amazing speed, strength, ryatsu, and defensive capabilities. Even if other aspects were not very mature, as long as the speed was fast enough and the ryatsu was strong enough, everything would not be a problem. Therefore, even for them, the captain-level Shinigami, it was not so easy to deal with him. In this regard, Mashiro, who seemed to understand, wondered, could it be that in the future, Berry-tan will be able to defeat that Shiroha? She fights just for fun. She is not so clear about the strength of others, and she doesn't care much. She is considered carefree and clueless. Well. After a moment of silence, Shinji spoke up, the two cannot be compared. Is Ichigo strong? Very strong. Whether it is strength or talent, he is impressive. But even so, he can't easily surpass Shiroha. I also think that even a genius cannot be compared with that person, Love said carelessly. Such a monster should not be included in the discussion. How can a normal person defeat such a monster? He felt that Shiroha might be stronger than Aizen. After all, if they deal with it carefully, they can attack together after activating their hollow masks, and they would have a chance to take down Aizen. But if it is Shiroha, the outcome is uncertain. Rojuro seemed to have thought of something, and said to Lisa. By the way, won't you be upset about this? After all, you are acquaintances. But now, our identities are not secret anymore, and we are not in the same camp as him. Don't worry. Lisa didn't even raise her head, focusing on the magazine she was reading. To him, it doesn't matter whether someone is a Shinigami or not. Shiroha doesn't care about boring existences. In his eyes, there are probably only two concepts, interesting or boring. He will look down on everyone equally, including the visored. She even felt that even if it was Aizen and the Soul King, this person didn't care. Although it sounds incredible, this is Shiroha. Whether it is character or strength, he is equally unfathomable, unpredictable, and mysterious to the extreme. That's true. Rojuro was also quite speechless. In other words, Shiroha beat them up for no reason because he thought they were interesting? But is this a good thing or a bad thing? It feels weird. Shinji nodded in agreement and said, if it weren't for this, we might have already started to flee. After all, our position has not been exposed until now. So, he really didn't take us seriously. So, we should thank him for looking down on us. Love curled his lips and wanted to refute, but he was not confident enough. Defeat is the original sin, there is nothing to say. That's right, that's it. Kensei nodded in agreement. At this time, the kind-hearted Hachi frowned. It seems that someone has touched my barrier. Is it that guy? Mashiro raised her head excitedly and shouted to the air. I didn't say anything bad about you, they said it all. The others were speechless, and at the same time, they felt a chill on their backs. They all suspected that Shiroha was spying on them. Otherwise, how could it be such a coincidence? As soon as they were discussing him, someone showed up. In their opinion, the person who came could only be Shiroha. After all, with Hachi's barrier, it's impossible for just anyone to discover it, right? After a while, the group of single-visored looked at the two high school students who were chatting happily as they approached, and they were speechless. Shiroha was fine, he was a monster. But how could an ordinary high school girl now discover and break through the hidden barriers? Had their underground base become a public place? Could anyone come in? Although the pure-hearted Princess Oraheim looked happy, the content of the topic was not actually light-hearted. She brought news from the Gotei 13. In about 4 months, Aizen would launch a massive attack, with the goal of wiping out Karakura Town and its residents to turn them into the key to enter the Soul King Palace, also known as the Oken. This timeline was calculated by the captain of the 12th Division, Mayuri Kuratsuchi. The Hogyoku extracted from the soul needed time to fully awaken. This time was about 4 months. And after that, Aizen would attack Karakura Town. Is this what Aizen wants? Ichigo said with a firm face. Don't worry, Karakura Town and everyone will be fine. Because I will defeat Aizen. He must participate in this battle. Because his family and friends were here. He would never lose. Several visored next to him were comforting Hachi. Hachi, don't be discouraged, there is no problem with your barrier. You just picked the wrong opponent. We believe in you. Hachi was not discouraged, but said seriously. I was not shocked, but I felt that the power of this girl was very similar to my barrier. That is why she could sense my barrier. He had no ill will towards the sudden appearance of Oraheim, and even felt kindness toward her. Because the two had similar soul traits. Is this also the case with Shiroha? Love looked curious. Hachi shook his head and explained. Mr. Uehara is completely different. I can understand and analyze the way this girl entered the barrier. If there are enough Ryatsu samples, I can probably counter it. But Mr. Uehara is different. The way he invaded and the composition of his power are a mystery. Until now, I still can't understand it and can't perceive it. This is definitely not something that ordinary spacetime abilities can do. I can't think of any way to do this, let alone counterattack. To put it simply, he would still lose to Aizen or other masters. But, at least, he knew where he lost. Facing Shiroha, he didn't even know how he lost. This is the difference. He is a monster indeed. Shinji, Love, and others all nodded in agreement. Although they also didn't know how Shiroha did all this, it didn't prevent them from being shocked. Are you talking about me? At this moment, Shiroha's figure suddenly emerged from thin air. Ghost! Love couldn't help but howl. Rojuro and others were all shocked. This person could really appear silently, like a ghost. If this was a sneak attack, who could defend against it? Oraheim and Ichigo next to them also looked at Shiroha with curiosity. Both of them were thick-skinned and had not yet realized the seriousness of the matter. They still thought that Shiroha and the visored were in the same group. Hiyori continued to act normally, grinning. What do you want? Do you want to take our Lisa away? Children should not interfere in adult matters. After saying this, Shiroha turned around and walked towards Ichigo step by step. What can you learn from this group of people? Hide-and-seek techniques or the ability to take a beating? The skills that Ichigo learned from the visored cannot be said to be useless, but it can be said that it makes little difference whether he has them or not. Although Shinji and others regard Ichigo as a companion and want to pull him into their team, in fact, he is completely different from them. The two sides are not in the same world, not in the same dimension. What can an ant teach a dragon? Chapter 139, Ichigo Kurosaki is in a state of hollowness, vulnerable. After hearing what Shiroha said, Oraheim's eyes lit up immediately, and she looked at him with gratitude. She was extremely sensitive and had long noticed the strangeness of Ichigo. So after noticing that his Ryatsu disappeared inexplicably, she came over. Ichigo stood up, his expression also a little excited. Commander Uehara, do you really have a way to help me? The reason why he didn't ask Urahara and the Shinigami for help was to avoid suspicion. On the one hand, he didn't want his friends to see him turned into a monster. On the other hand, he felt that Urahara and other Shinigami couldn't solve his problem. After all, the shopkeeper had seen his hollow appearance, and if there was a solution, he would definitely speak up. Although he didn't have much contact with the Shinigami, he felt that they were not as powerful as manager Urahara. But it was different when it came to Commander Uehara. He still remembered the power of the 5 elements barrier. Sometimes, when he dreamed at night, he could still dream of those water, fire, earth, and wood elements that made him miserable. Because of this, he recognized Shiroha as soon as he saw him. Even his face blindness was cured without medication, which was a medical miracle. In his opinion, someone who could create such a powerful barrier must be able to create miracles. So, he believed that the other party could help him. You. Being mocked in person and being mocked like this, Hiyori blushed with anger. She yelled at Ichigo. Don't listen to him, Blondie. He is lying to you.
He is a Shinigami and there is no way he knows about hollowification.
We were here first. After saying that, she curled up and was about to launch a death charge. She wanted to fight to the death with Shiroha. As a reckless hothead, there was no word of fear in her dictionary. Even if she knew she was going to lose, she still had to fight. However, just as she was about to act, Shinji grabbed her very skillfully.
Calm down.
Impulsiveness can't solve the problem, it will only solve us. You Baldy, are you scared? Hiyori, who was 1.5 meters tall, had the aura of a 2.7 meter tall man.
How can I not be afraid?
Shinji said helplessly.
Who wouldn't be afraid of that monster? That's not an enemy that can be solved by just getting excited. We can't handle it.
Even if the captain commander comes, he may not be able to win.
It's normal to be afraid. Rojuro, who looked melancholy, nodded again and again. Shinji is right. We'd better not make an enemy of him.
Seeing the internal strife of the visored, Shiroha added fuel to the fire. Watch carefully, learn well, there is something for you to learn. He can learn a simple technique like hollowification at a glance.
Besides, can't he teach people, and can't he beat people? If you can't learn, just beat them. Hearing this, Hiyori exploded again.
The group hurriedly grabbed her. In the end, she could only bare her fangs at Shiroha with a fierce look.
As a result, Shiroha glanced over, and Hiyori shrank her body and calmed down.
Even if she faced Aizen, she wouldn't be so cowardly. But facing Shiroha, who looked indifferent and didn't show off his abilities, she would feel intimidated for no reason. She didn't know why herself. Shinji sighed to himself, finally someone can control her.
It's not easy. Although the visored were very reluctant to transform. However, facing Shiroha, they had no choice at all.
In addition, this was a good opportunity to test his purpose and strength. As Hachi set up several powerful barriers, Ichigo, who had activated his hollow mask, rushed towards Shiroha. Facing White Ichigo, whose momentum was rising and whose Ryatsu was getting stronger, Shiroha responded calmly. He did not fight back, but just blocked it casually.
In fact, his blocking was just a show.
The opponent's attack could not even penetrate the defense of the universal barrier, and it posed no threat to him.
Commander Uehara, you are really strong.
After the words fell, Ichigo was also ruthless and directly activated his Bankai. The enemy in front of him was like a mountain, unshakable. Facing such an opponent, he had no right to hold back. Even if he tried his best, he could not see any hope of victory. Bankai plus hollowification, his strength, speed, and Ryatsu increased sharply.
Shiroha nodded, that's more like it, then I will fight you with Kensei level Ryatsu.
Kensei next to him had a face full of question marks.
What does this have to do with me? When did I become a unit of measurement for Ryatsu? Stop looking down on me. However, all Shiroha could do was simulate a battle, that is, hold back.
Otherwise, even if the Ryatsu was suppressed to the level of Kensei, he could kill Ichigo in one shot.
This was true even if the opponent activated both hollowification and Bankai at the same time. With the blessing of Tensa Zangetsu and hollowification, Ichigo's offensive became extremely fierce. He launched a storm of attacks, but it didn't work at all. Shiroha followed the opponent's battle rhythm with ease, and perfectly responded to every move and style of Ichigo. Moreover, he only blocked and didn't counterattack. He only used the Ryatsu of a Shinigami captain throughout the whole process, but he didn't lose the upper hand, and even completely suppressed Ichigo. Seeing this scene, Shinji and others began to doubt their lives. They were struggling to face Ichigo at full strength. While suppressing his strength, Shiroha could easily deal with Ichigo. Did Ichigo become weak or was Shiroha too strong? Rojuro was shocked. He didn't even release his Zanpakuto, but took such an attack with his bare hands. He couldn't understand why a young Shinigami had such strong strength. Such strength was even beyond their imagination. He didn't even move a step. Love swallowed his saliva, his face horrified. Thinking of the fear of being dominated by White, Hiyori looked unhappy. This guy wasn't so useless when he fought us. He's not playing, is he?
From memory, apart from anything else, Ichigo's Shunpa speed and reaction speed were both amazingly fast.
When he attacked seriously, she couldn't react at all. This guy was as fierce as a tiger when he hit her. Why is he so lame now? Yes, his speed seems to have slowed down. Even Kensei noticed this.
Before, when he was practicing with them, after Ichigo became a hollow, he moved like the wind, and his footwork was so fast that he couldn't even see it clearly.
Shiroa clearly only used the same Ryatsu and speed as Ichigo. When the strength is equal, why can one party suppress the other? This is really strange. Unbelievable. Incomprehensible.
Shinji's eyes narrowed as he analyzed.
Because his movements and even his Ryatsu were all suppressed, or divided.
Therefore, he did not exert his full strength.
What do you mean? I don't understand. Hiyori was confused. Lisa also put down her beloved magazine and looked at the two people fighting seriously.
The insurmountable figure in front of her overlapped with the lazy and handsome figure from before. From the beginning, as a vice-captain, she envied Shiroa very much. Although he was only a seated officer, he could chat and laugh with her own captain, and his momentum and words were not inferior at all. Such unparalleled confidence and charm, she also wanted to have.
This guy is shining. Looking at Shiroa in battle, Mashiro's eyes lit up.
At this time, several visored noticed that in addition to his overly powerful strength, he was also impeccable in terms of personal charm and appearance. However, they are immune to this.
Maybe some people are born to be favored by God.
Rojuro even had the urge to ask him what skincare products he used. His skin was so good, just like Mashiro said, it was shining. Oraheim held the corners of her clothes with both hands, curled up into a ball, and was so nervous that she could hardly breathe.
Kind-hearted Hachi walked up to her and started talking. He happened to be very curious about her ability.
The innocent Oraheim was also distracted.
During the conversation, Hachi learned that Oraheim's Shun Rika was partially destroyed by the Arrancar.
So, he took the initiative to offer to help repair it. It is not easy to meet someone with similar abilities in the world of the living. For him, it was like suddenly having a family member.
For Oraheim, it was almost the same. While repairing, Hachi said doubtfully, "How strange.
Judging from the composition of our Ryatsu, our abilities are very similar. In this case, your Shun Rika should be able to recover by itself." As soon as he finished speaking, he repaired the damaged Shun Rika through his spacetime Kido. To be precise, the part that carries the Tsubaki spirit.
Oraheim once used Tsubaki to launch the Koten Zanshuan against Yami, but the opponent's powerful Ryatsu destroyed Tsubaki.
As a result, the Shun Rika was damaged. Now, with the recovery of the Shun Rika, Tsubaki also reappeared. Seeing Tsubaki reappear, Oraheim was very happy and thanked Hachi repeatedly.
Hachi said gently, "Now that your abilities have been restored, you can fight alongside your friend again.
However, considering that your abilities are similar to mine, you are not suitable for the front line, just like me." That's what he said, but he would never avoid a fight. Even if he is not good at fighting, he will choose to stay with his friend and fight to the end.
Oraheim had the same idea. In addition, Chad and Yuria had the same idea. The two of them felt the abnormality of Ichigo to some extent.
Like Oraheim, they were unable to fight alongside Ichigo because of their lack of strength. So, the two began rigorous training. At this time, Ichigo launched his strongest attack on Shiroa, Getsuga Tensho. If he had no other choice, he would not use such a killing move. Only by fighting with the opponent in person can one experience the opponent's strength and terror.
It is a power so strong that it makes people despair. Ichigo is completely helpless.
He also knows that the reason why he has the opportunity to perform Getsuga Tensho is entirely because the opponent does not care. Otherwise, he will not even have the opportunity to attack instantly. Shiroa gently waved his hand, and the black Ryatsu that enveloped him shattered and disappeared. This move of Ichigo's is actually a bit interesting. The condensation method is the slash of the Shinigami, but the release method is similar to the Zero of the Hollows. In addition, there is a little racial control ability of the Quincy. It should be that Uncle Zangetsu secretly helped. It seems that the opponent is very afraid of him, so he added a layer of insurance. Seeing Shiroha standing still under the amazing slashing waves and Ryatsu, the Visored were a little numb. Even those Hieroskin Arankars could not ignore such attacks. But Shiroha did it. However, this is Shiroha, what's so strange about it? Mr. Ichigo's moves are very unusual. It seems that he has a special ability to control Raisher. Hachi, who is proficient in Kido, has a very good perception ability. He saw at a glance that Ichigo's killing moves are very similar to the moves of the Shinigami and the Arankar, but not quite. It's very strange. But the power is beyond doubt, super strong. So what? Did it hurt the enemy? Hiyori also disliked the rebellious Ichigo. She hated the Shinigami, and the Shinigami. Of course, this hatred was not malicious, but she is a typical irritable old sister. She is not happy with anything, but she has no intention to harm others. In fact, after the Battle of Karakura Town, Hiyori chose to stay in the world of the living. She claimed that she hated humans and Shinigami, but she worked honestly to make a living, which was inconsistent with her arrogant words. At this time, Shiroha took a step forward and showed a kind smile to the confused Ichigo. Have you had enough? It's my turn now. At this moment, Ichigo was doubting his life. When he was easily suppressed by Shiroha before, he had already begun to doubt. But now, he doubted even more. His CPU was about to burn out, and he was just about to ask the classic 3 questions. Who am I? Where am I? What am I doing? Because his ultimate move was completely ineffective. This was a killer move that he released at the risk of losing control, but it turned out to be so vulnerable and had no effect at all. This was even more outrageous than when Aizen caught his Tensa Zangetsu with one finger. After all, at that time, he was in a very bad state. But now, he has mastered the power of the hollow and his strength has been greatly improved. Why is he still so weak? I said these people can't teach you. Seeing the other party's doubtful look, Shiroha kindly explained. I've told you before, don't fight your instincts. After all, instincts are part of your strength. I know you don't understand. Don't worry, I'll teach you with my fists. No one in this world understands Ichigo better than he does. Therefore, when Ichigo meets him, he is lucky to have met a treasure. After all, Ichigo's power is extremely complex. Most people can't understand it at all. Even Aizen and Urahara only define him as a candidate for the Soul King, that is, a hybrid of the Quincy and the Shinigami. However, Ichigo's power is far from being as simple as an ordinary hybrid. He can be said to be a small Soul King. Ichigo not only possesses the power of the Shinigami, the power of the Quincy, and the power of the Hollow, but also possesses the Fullbring ability. He is a true 4-race hybrid with amazing potential. Among them, the power of the Shinigami represents the manifestation of Zanpakuto and the inner world. Because of the existence of the power of the Shinigami, Yawatch representing the power of the Quincy and White representing the Hollow can be visualized. Among them, White represents the power of the Hollow, and it is also the power of instinct. Zangetsu is composed of the power of the Hollow and the power of the Shinigami. Ichigo himself only uses the power of the Shinigami and only believes in the power of the Shinigami. White can use 2 powers at the same time, which is naturally stronger. Chapter 140. If Ichigo doesn't make a breakthrough, doesn't release his instincts, and doesn't trust his instincts, then he will never be able to truly master his Zanpakuto. This is what Zangetsu has always wanted to tell Ichigo. Unfortunately, Zangetsu's throat is almost hoarse by the monk, and Ichigo still can't hear him. Today, Shiroha plans to personally teach him how to dance with wolves and how to release the demons in his heart. Ichigo was speechless. Can I refuse? This didn't sound right. And now he had just used up his hollow and couldn't continue to hollowify in a short time. This was obviously a no-win situation. The Visored next to him naturally knew the situation and discussed with confusion. Isn't this training? Shiroha simply wanted to beat up Ichigo, right? Uncertain. It should be the same as what we thought before, wanting to push Ichigo to his limit.
Hasn't this training already been done? It's very dangerous.
Yes, both the out-of-control Ichigo and Shiroa are dangerous guys.
Although they had many questions in their hearts, they wisely chose to wait and see.
After all, if a friend dies, I will die. If they tried to stop them, they might be the ones to get beaten. Last time, they got beaten, and it was not a pleasant experience. This was a good opportunity to see the limit of Ichigo and the trump card of Shiroha. Over there, Shiroha had already rushed in with Tenjin Shuunpa.
Ordinary people don't get this treatment. He can easily crush conventional opponents in an instant. But Ichigo is different.
This kid's reaction speed is extremely fast, and his perception method is not only the spiritual perception of the Shinigami, but also the erasure locking ability of the Quincy. The Tenjin Shuunpa containing the power of space is superior to Shuunpa, Sonido, Herenkyaku, and Bringer Light, and it also exceeds the induction limit of spiritual perception and nerve detection. Therefore, there was not even a visual residue in everyone's eyes, and they could not use spiritual perception to capture the residual image of Ryatsu. In their eyes, Shiroa in the distance just took a step, and the next moment Ichigo flew out. It was not until Ichigo stood up with a shaken body that Shiroa's figure slowly became solid from the air.
This scene looked very scary and magical.
The Visored once again recalled the fear of being dominated by the Tenjin Shuunpa.
They were shocked and exclaimed again and again. That's how we lost in the beginning. This is definitely not something that Shuunpa can achieve. The loss is not unfair. It's like art. It disappeared in an instant, so cool.
In fact, several Visored have already realized that Ichigo's reaction speed and Shuunpa speed have not slowed down, and have even become much faster. But even so, facing the sudden attack of Shiroa, he still has no ability to resist.
Comparing the two, they understand that their loss is not unfair.
Faced with such a fast speed, they must use all their trump cards at the first time, otherwise they will be killed instantly.
However, this seems to be just Shiroa's regular moves. From beginning to end, let alone Shurkai Bankai, he didn't even pull out the Zanpakuto from his waist. Shiroa only used Shuunpa and Hakuta throughout the whole process to gain an absolute advantage.
Facing this kind of monster-like evil, even if they use all their trump cards, they have no chance of winning. Ichigo's natural strength is already terrifying, but compared with Shiroa, it is nothing. They really don't know how this guy became so strong. At this moment, in Ichigo's inner world, White frowned and clenched his fists. If he was dealing with an ordinary enemy, he would have been eager to show up. Even if his power was suppressed, even if he was feared by Ichigo, as long as he took action, he could easily deal with the enemy. He only needed to swing his sword. But the enemy in front of him was too scary. He couldn't defeat such an enemy by himself. Ichigo must have a stronger awareness. The always calm Uncle Zangetsu was also surprised. Didn't he dodge it? This is beyond my expectation. Whether it is Shuunpa or other high-speed movement techniques, it is impossible to be so fast.
Is the gap so big?
Just now, he has actually used part of the power of the Quincy. Ichigo's reaction speed and perception ability should have been greatly improved. Under this premise, he should not be completely powerless to fight back. Unless the opponent completely sees through their strength and their actions.
But is this possible?
Not only is Shiroa's speed problematic, the opponent's Ryatsu is also very mysterious. At this moment, Ichigo felt it most directly. In his impression, his defense and speed have always been excellent. But he has never encountered such an attack that he cannot avoid or defend against. Moreover, the opponent's fist seemed to hurt a lot. Just a hit, his body was shaky, and his consciousness seemed to be sinking into the endless sea.
You can still stand, very good. After one move, Shiroa did not continue to attack.
He wanted to give Ichigo time to adapt. Although Ichigo's potential and talent were very strong, the gap between them was too big. Therefore, he had to give him time to adapt. He's afraid that in the entire Soul Society, there is no perfect sparring partner and training dummy like Ichigo. Therefore, he did not want to end too quickly. Taking advantage of this gap, Ichigo took a few quick breaths and recovered his physical strength and Ryatsu.
However, soon, the inexplicable attack came again. This time, it was better than the last time. At least, at the moment of being attacked, he could vaguely perceive the attack coming. But the opponent's attack was too fast and too urgent. Even if he sensed it, he couldn't react, let alone dodge. After being punched again, he felt that his soul was about to be shattered. Although there was not much damage to his body, the mental oppression was too strong. At this moment, Ichigo truly felt the arrival of death. In the critical moment, he instinctively activated the hollow state again. For a moment, a strong Ryatsu rushed out, shaking the surrounding air. With the help of the surging Ryatsu, he clenched Zangetsu and barely stood still. Shinji and others beside him all looked focused inside. It's so easy to hollowify. His Ryatsu has become stronger. Even when you are in an absolutely unfavorable situation, you can still improve your strength. This kid really has endless potential. That's it, you blondie, cheer up and don't embarrass me. Just as the visored were sighing or encouraging, Ichigo burst out with Ryatsu and his speed increased sharply. After a Shuinpa, he came behind Shiroha and was about to release Getsuga Tensho from a distance. He was a little scared of being beaten. He really had no confidence in close combat, even if he activated Bankai and Hollowification. However, Ichigo just raised his hand. Shiroha, who had his back to him, had inexplicably come in front of him, and then slapped him with a big palm. Then, Ichigo, who had greatly increased his strength after hollowifying again, did a 360-degree aerial turn, and his mask was almost broken. Seeing this scene, the faces of several visored changed again, and they directly sentenced him to death. You can't beat him, there's no hope. Meanwhile, Shiroha was in high spirits. He only used the Tenjin Shuinpa and the Ryatsu of the Unity of Man and Sword to suppress the hollowified Ichigo without any chance of fighting back. However, Ichigo was different from an ordinary captain. An opponent of that level, once suppressed by him, would have no chance of turning the tables. Ichigo was like a bouncy ball made of a special material, soft but with infinite rebound. In short, he was very durable and felt very good to hit. Shiroha was very measured in his attacks, only destroying the opponent's defense and will, but not causing substantial damage. This required absolute skills, strength, and incredible abilities. And he just had all of these. At that time, Ichigo's mind had sunk into a deeper space of consciousness. Despair and powerlessness caused flaws to appear in his mind. The power of the hollow gradually gained the upper hand and began to occupy his body to a greater extent. His hair began to slowly grow longer, and his body's recovery and defense capabilities also became stronger. The 3 red lines on the right half of his mask became brighter. Moreover, these 3 red lines not only became darker in color, but the coverage area also quietly expanded. The experienced visored immediately noticed these abnormalities. They knew that this was a sign that the power of the hollow had the upper hand. If they continued to fight like this, it's possible that Ichigo will lose control, or even become completely hollowified. But since Shiroha did not call for a stop, they had no way to stop him. Moreover, they did not think that he came here just to deliberately turn Ichigo into a hollow. He must be fully confident that he dared to force Ichigo like this. Shiroha certainly noticed the changes in Ichigo. He secretly increased the strength of his attack. As expected, the opponent's transformation was achieved. Although it was only a partial transformation, the improvement in strength was still significant. As far as he knew, Ichigo's hollow had several forms, including the irrational half-mask substitute form, the semi-out-of-control state, the normal hollow form, the long-haired bull head form, and the double red-lined hollowification. After the hollowification, the Ryatsu and physical strength will be greatly improved, and it will be possible to display the abilities of the hollows, such as Sonito and Siro. However, for Shiroha, these abilities are neither new nor difficult. Ichigo is strong in that he can perfectly fuse multiple powers together. For example, he can release slashes in the form of Siro, he can use the power of the Shinigami to materialize the power of the Quincy, and so on. These fusion methods are very valuable for reference. Shiroha does not mind learning from it.
After fusing the Hogyoku, he can also better develop the power of the Transcendent and the Soul King candidate. Over there, Ichigo felt that the hollow mask on his face suddenly became heavier. The red lines on the top had spread, making his entire right eyeball look extremely hideous and terrifying. It was releasing a murderous intent and violence that was completely different from the left eye. At the same time, a familiar voice suddenly sounded in his ears. "Get out of the way, let me do it. You alone can't be his opponent." Hearing the unruly voice in his ear, Ichigo's eyes flashed with that strange white face. That face looked very similar to him, but it was definitely not him. His heart sank, and he immediately covered his right eye with his hand. The visored who saw this scene from a distance also felt their hearts sink. They knew that Ichigo had one foot on the abyss and was only one step away from complete hollowification. However, in the end, they chose to believe in Shiroha. Orihime even put her hands in a praying gesture, with worry written all over her face. It's that feeling again. Such a heavy and terrifying Ryatsu. Kurosaki-kun, hold on. Looking at Ichigo, who was still struggling, Shiroha released a little bit of his aura. I know you have a lot of worries and struggles. But now I am standing in front of you. If you continue to hesitate, you will surely die. Being cautious does not mean stopping, and being careful does not mean giving up. Stopping and fearing the future will only lead to destruction. So Ichigo, welcome the glorious evolution. Shiroha's simple words surged in all directions like a raging wolf. The Ryatsu contained in it is like a sword, indestructible, and obliterates everything. Shinji reacted immediately and activated his hollow mask to release Ryatsu to shield Orihime. The other visored also responded in the same way, bursting out Ryatsu and taking defensive measures. Obviously, they were far away from the battlefield, and there were even several barriers in between. And the words transmitted were just simple words, but they still suffered a strong impact. If it weren't for the fact that their strength increased greatly after the hollowification, they would even be injured. Shiroha's words were more terrible than the slash of a Shinigami captain, and could even hurt the soul. The knowledgeable people looked at each other in shock. It is impossible for a simple Ryatsu burst to have such power. It contains abilities and skills that they cannot understand. Rojuro even saw the shadow of his own Bankai in it. They were affected by the aftermath, not to mention Ichigo, who was the first to bear the brunt. At this time, Ichigo only felt like he was facing thousands of troops, and boundless murderous intent enveloped him. His eyes were bloodshot, as if he was in a sea of blood and corpses, an endless hell. Shiroha's tall and handsome figure became even more unattainable, like an ancient god or demon, awe-inspiring and inviolable. All of a sudden, a nerve broke in Ichigo's brain. At this time, for seconds had passed, and the hollow mask that should have dissipated became more solid. The red lines on it emitted a strange red light, and even invaded the left half of the mask. At the same time, his eyes were full of murderous intent and violence, so much so that they were stained with a layer of blood. At this time, Ichigo's consciousness had been replaced by hollow white. The violent instinct to destroy the enemy and destroy everything dominated his consciousness. The next moment, his figure disappeared. He held the sword in his right hand, and his left hand turned into a sharp claw and swung it fiercely at Shiroha's vitals. The completely hollowified Ichigo was totally different from before, highlighting that he was ruthless and didn't talk much. Sonido? Shiroha noticed that the opponent's ratio fluctuations were very slight when he moved, and his explosive power was very strong. It was extremely concealed and moved very quickly over short distances. This was the characteristic of Sonido. In fact, under the perception of observation haki, he could clearly see the difference between the four movement techniques. But to be honest, he was too lazy to distinguish them carefully. Anyway, no matter which technique it was impossible to surpass his Tenjin Shuinpa. Only the light form movement of Hogyoku Aizen and the Soul King form of Yawatch could put him under some pressure in terms of speed. So in the face of the enemy's surprise attack, Shiroha remained motionless and said calmly, "You finally got it, but is it only to this extent?" The irritable white roared wildly and increased his strength again. Chapter 141. However, Shiroha only felt his body lighten as he leaped into the air, soaring effortlessly.
The feeling's not right, Uehara Shiroha frowned as he moved using Tenjin Shuunpa. Just now, he had clearly used the Quincy's Blood technique. Blood Artery boosted his attack speed and acceleration, while Blood Veine greatly enhanced defense. But those two couldn't be used at the same time. That was a basic principle. And yet, Uncle Zangetsu had just made his move. This Yawatch was starting to lose his composure. It seemed Shiroha's earlier taunt had gotten under the silver fox's skin. White was as fast and fierce as a wildfire, while Zangetsu remained calm and steady like a seasoned veteran. Together, their teamwork was impressive. Unfortunately for them, their opponent was Uehara Shiroha. Their cooperation simply wasn't enough. After all, Ichigo still had too much of his power sealed away, and his strength fluctuated wildly. One moment up, the next down. But even if Ichigo unleashed his full power, he still wouldn't be able to defeat Shiroha. The reason was simple: Ichigo's control over his strength was far too shallow. After their attack, the confident grin on White's face froze. Even the hollow mask covering him showed a fine crack. He was the one who attacked first, yet he was the one who got hurt. How was that even fair? He'd been careful, only unleashing his full strength at the very last moment. In the past, he never would have held back like that. But caution didn't make any difference here. The problem was the opponent's movements were downright abnormal. White had never seen footwork like that, able to withstand an attack, then instantly counter from behind. What kind of speed did it take to pull that off? On the surface, all he could do was defend against this freakish speed. But White knew one thing. If he wanted to win, he had to gamble. He needed to land a fatal blow. Even if it was a desperate move, he had to take that one chance. There wouldn't be another. Meanwhile, the spectators finally noticed that Ichigo's Ryatsu had become overwhelmingly heavy and terrifying. There was no need for proof. Anyone using spiritual perception could feel it. This Ryatsu was strong and inhumanly vicious. That kind of bloodthirsty, violent killing intent, they were all familiar with it. Only hollows gave off that kind of presence. Yet even with this monstrous power, Ichigo was nearly crushed by Shiroha. Everyone watching knew it, Shiroha had been holding back. If this were a fight to the death, Ichigo might already be gone. Sure, Ichigo's potential was undeniable. After becoming a hollow, he could grow even stronger. But what was truly frightening was Uehara Shiroha. No matter how far Ichigo's hollowification pushed him, Shiroha stayed calm. He faced it head-on. And he crushed it effortlessly. That kind of overwhelming strength was simply beyond comprehension. At that moment, White unleashed his ultimate move. The Black Hollow Zero, destructive enough to rip through anything, merged with the Bankai Tensa Zangetsu in his hand. The result was an unimaginably terrifying slash. Tensa Zangetsu itself was forged from ultra-high-density Ryatsu, able to fire powerful slashes at lightning speed. Now it fused with a Hollow Zero. The combination was devastating. If Ichigo had used this move when fighting Grimmjow, his opponent would have been obliterated on the spot. The black crescent-shaped slash roared out like a tidal wave of destruction, tearing through everything and blotting out the sky and earth. The entire underground base plunged into darkness and started shaking violently. The powerful barriers set up by Hachijin Ashoda were pierced, layer by layer, and teetered on the verge of collapse. A single slash, and it felt like the world was ending. The ground split apart, massive, bottomless ravines opening up out of nowhere. The Visored were stunned. Without hesitation, they retreated, flying back at top speed. As they withdrew, Oraheim and Hachijin hastily rebuilt the barriers, desperately trying to contain the onslaught of Black Ryatsu. At the same time, they couldn't help but worry about Shiroha. He hadn't moved. From beginning to end, he stood there with the air of a victor. Calm. Unshaken. And now, he was planning to block this attack head-on. But to stand there and take a hit like that, was that even possible? As the terrifying black slash came crashing in like a dark tsunami, Shiroha merely raised his hand and gave a casual wave. In an instant, his Ryatsu exploded outward.
A storm of power erupted, dispersing the incoming slash and clearing away the black Ryatsu. Around him, an absolute safe zone formed. Like the eye of a hurricane, dead calm at the center, even as chaos raged around it. Seeing this, White wanted nothing more than to bail. He suddenly understood Ichigo's earlier fear. For once, White agreed this wasn't cowardice. It was common sense. If your strongest attack couldn't even scratch the guy, and he hadn't even moved? It was like an ant trying to knock over a mountain. This wasn't about winning or losing anymore. They weren't even in the same league. Pure Ryatsu can actually do that? That's impossible. Shinji's voice trembled. The other Vizards stood in stunned silence. In their world, when facing an attack like that, you needed a Zanpakuto to block it. That was just how it worked. A Shinigami without a sword was completely different from one with a Zanpakuto. And yet, Shiroha hadn't even drawn a blade. He'd simply released his Ryatsu and wiped out the slash. It made no sense. It defied every law of combat they understood. On the battlefield, White voiced the question they were all thinking. How did you do it? As far as White knew, even at the same level, a Shinigami's defense was weaker than a Quincy's or a Hollow's. But Shiroha had broken that rule. He'd used his body to take on White's attack, an attack even an Arrancar's Hierro or a Quincy's activated blood couldn't withstand. And Shiroha was standing there, completely unscathed. How? It wasn't just White who wanted an answer. Uncle Zangetsu, Ichigo, and the surrounding Vizard were all holding their breath, waiting. Shiroha answered calmly, "It's simple. Your understanding of Zanpakuto and Ryatsu is far too shallow. And your Zanpakuto and your Ryatsu are far too weak." He had already reached a state where man and sword were one. His Ryatsu carried the power of Shunkyo, allowing him to deflect all the black flashes and slashing waves before they even reached him. From the outside, it looked like White's attack was swallowing him whole. But in reality, none of it ever touched his body. Even if it had, it wouldn't have mattered. The universal barrier was more than enough to block it. In terms of defense, Shinigami Ryatsu, Quincy Blood, and Hollow Hierro were all beneath the surface knowledge of the universal barrier. As for Ryatsu itself, it could change the world. It could even create one. But the way Shinigami, Quincy, and Hollow used Ryatsu was far too basic. Uehara Shiroha had combined countless skills and abilities, pushing them all to their absolute limits. That was how he could fully maximize the use of Ryatsu. And with that alone, he was able to suppress Ichigo even when Ichigo was drawing on the power of the Soul King's backup. After drawing out Ichigo's true potential, Shiroha didn't waste any more time. He calmly gripped Shunkyo in his right hand and took a single step forward. "I see you." The moment Shiroha moved, White tensed up. Clutching Zangetsu tightly, he exploded with Ryatsu, his body coiled like a spring ready to snap. Right now, White felt stronger than ever. The seals that had been binding him were starting to loosen. This time, it was going to work. Then he hit the ground, flat on his back. Nope. Shiroha slowly sheathed his sword. To everyone watching, it looked like he hadn't even moved. White had managed to catch a glimpse of his movement, but what he saw wasn't Shiroha's attack. It was his return. By the time White realized it, he was already down. As Shiroha spoke, a faint black shadow flickered behind Ichigo. No one noticed it, no one except Shiroha. Not even Ichigo himself was aware. The moment that shadow appeared, time and space seemed to stutter. The world felt like it froze for an instant. That was the power of the Quincy inside Ichigo's inner world. The purest Quincy power, the source of all Quincy. It carried the inheritance of Masaki Kurosaki's pure-blooded Quincy lineage, as well as the fragmented soul of Yawatch. This power was immense. It could control both blood and shadows. It was the power of a god. Just moments ago, Uncle Zangetsu had even loosened his suppression on White, in order to protect Ichigo. But in the face of Shiroha's overwhelming power, it didn't matter. Shiroha pinned them down instantly. The combined might of the Mind Gem and Shunkyo Ryatsu snuffed out the flames of the Quincy King like they were nothing.
Nobody else even understood what had just happened. They didn't sense the clash.
They didn't grasp the level of power being thrown around. All they knew was that Ichigo had been defeated. The Vizard could only stare.
As far as they saw it, Shiroa hadn't used any fancy techniques. But his Zanpakuto had clearly reached an inhuman level.
The skills and mastery contained in his movements were something no ordinary Shinigami captain could ever reach in their entire lives.
Shiroa wielded that level of mastery with ease, integrating it into every casual motion.
It was flawless.
Completely natural.
As if it was just the way things were.
This was strength and skill fused into one, a realm they couldn't even dream about. In Shiroa's hands, a Zanpakuto became an overwhelming force of oppression.
Even standing at a distance, they felt crushed by it. And even if Shiroa relied on nothing but his Zanpakuto, he could wipe out a captain's Bankai, and probably take down dozens of Shirkai without breaking a sweat.
At that moment, Ichigo came to.
His face was pale as he fell to his knees.
His whole body ached.
His Ryatsu, physical stamina, and mental strength were completely drained. He felt like he'd aged 30 years in an instant. It was like he'd overdrafted his life energy, and now the bill was due. The emptiness hit him hard, all at once.
It was overwhelming. On the outside, his injuries didn't look serious. But in reality, they were. Shiroa's strike had first shattered the hollow mask and armor on Ichigo's body.
Then the substitute Shinigami badge, the very symbol of his Shinigami powers, cracked. Even the blood vein barrier Uncle Zangetsu had formed was pierced straight through. That one sword strike broke through all three of Ichigo's powers, Hollow, Shinigami, and Quincy. And when those three powers were damaged at once, it drained his strength on every level, body, soul, and mind. The only reason Ichigo was still conscious was because Shiroa had held back. Off to the side, Oraheim finally snapped out of it. She rushed forward, summoning the Shun Shun Rika for emergency healing.
But something was wrong.
Her power wasn't working. The residual Ryatsu clinging to Ichigo's wound was blocking her ability completely. Oraheim hadn't fully developed her Shun Shun Rika yet. Back when she faced Ulquiorra, even his leftover Ryatsu had messed with her powers. Now, against Shiroa, whose Ryatsu was at the upper limits of a Shinigami, it was hopeless. Her expression turned desperate. Seeing this, Shiroa casually waved his hand, retrieving the leftover Ryatsu from Ichigo's wounds. "You've got the same problem as Ichigo," he said flatly.
"Your understanding and control of your power are immature. Your mind, body, and skill aren't in sync. Your fundamentals are weak."
In truth, the entire plot of Bleach was the story of Ichigo learning to master his power. Aizen's greatest creation wasn't the Hogyoku, it was Ichigo himself. It wasn't until the very end that Ichigo completed his true Bankai and fully mastered his powers. And as far as Shiroa was concerned, the Visored weren't qualified to teach him. Instead of endless lectures on technique, it was better to show him his own weakness with pure strength.
Beat the lesson into him.
That way, Ichigo could grow.
Find enlightenment. Become a proper tool, and a capable frontline fighter.
There was something fulfilling about training the next generation with the iron fist of love. Meanwhile, White had been beaten back into Ichigo's inner world. His face twisted in fury and frustration. But all of it was useless.
Just now, Uncle Zangetsu had loosened some of his seals for Ichigo's safety.
Normally, the power Ichigo used as a hollow or a Shinigami was just a fraction of what he had.
The rest was sealed by the Quincy power within him.
But faced with Shiroa, who was too strong and too unpredictable, Uncle Zangetsu had stepped in. He used Quincy power to assist Ichigo, loosening the seals and letting more of his hollow and Shinigami strength pour out.
For that moment, White had more power than usual.
And yet, he'd still been crushed.
Cleanly.
It was clear now they weren't even on the same level. Even Uncle Zangetsu, in his Yawatch form, was stunned. He stared at the closing shadow rift in the air and muttered to himself.
One strike.
He broke through the triple defenses and closed the shadow channel.
This isn't just space manipulation. He's winning with his first sword draw. How terrifying.
So, Ichigo's voice was quiet as he finally spoke.
What exactly are you trying to teach me?
His expression was innocent.
Honest. He wasn't being sarcastic. He wasn't trying to make a joke. He genuinely didn't understand.
And he was nervous, worried he'd disappointed Shiroha somehow.
Oraheim watched Shiroha too, hopeful.
She wanted Ichigo to control his hollow power even more than Ichigo himself did. More than anything, she didn't want to see him turn into a monster. She'd already experienced that helplessness with her brother once.
She wasn't going through it again.
Nearby, the Visored whispered among themselves.
They glanced at Ichigo and Oraheim with pity.
They're still so pure, one of them muttered.
So innocent, stupid, really. I've always thought that kid wasn't too bright. Come on, it's obvious. He just wants to beat you up. Little strawberry, you blockhead. Maybe he's just inexperienced? No, this isn't inexperience, another said, shaking their head. This is pure stupidity. Chapter 142.
From the outside looking in, it seemed like Shiroha had simply beaten Ichigo into the ground. No one thought this counted as teaching.
So naturally, they didn't believe Ichigo could have learned anything useful from it. But the moment Shiroha's gaze swept over them, Shinji and the others instantly shut their mouths.
Even Hiyori lowered her head with a helpless grunt. Inwardly, Shiroha scoffed.
You guys were Aizen's lab rats. You really have no right to comment on Ichigo.
To others, Ichigo might have seemed a little slow. At best, they'd call him principled. At worst, they'd say he was soft-hearted, letting dangerous enemies off too easy. But to Shiroha, these were all strengths. If Ichigo didn't have that kind of personality, Shiroha wouldn't have bothered to guide him personally in the first place. Seeing Ichigo still struggling to understand, Shiroha decided to offer a little more insight. The key to hollowification isn't control, he said casually.
It's acceptance.
He looked Ichigo straight in the eye.
To some extent, the power of the Shinigami represents stillness. Hollows represent movement. So, what do you think the power that breaks the boundary between them represents?
Several captain-level Visored went quiet, deep in thought.
They understood exactly what he meant.
When they'd first gained hollow powers, they fought against them. As Shinigami, they'd instinctively rejected that hollow energy. It wasn't until they accepted it that they could stabilize. That acceptance was the foundation of their ability to hollowify freely.
So yes, they could relate to what Shiroha was saying. But the higher-level concepts, that was another story.
They hadn't even touched that level yet.
Not that Shiroha was explaining this for their sake.
For Ichigo, whether he could hollowify or not wasn't a major issue.
Other people's hollow powers were wild and uncontrollable. But Hollow White wasn't other people.
He was a white-haired tsundere.
Totally different situation.
In theory, combining Shinigami powers with Fullbring or any other hybrid energy could lead to becoming a transcendent.
But just like there were gaps between captains, there were massive differences in the strength of transcendence. Shiroha figured that the technicians of Squad Zero were basically the Rokuguruma Kensei of the Transcendence. The true peak of Transcendence?
That'd be people like Blood War Ichigo with 2 swords, or close to that. Even Collapse, Fusion Stage 5 Aizen was a little short of the mark. Shiroha was definitely looking forward to seeing Ichigo reach that level. At this point in time, Ichigo's strength was already unique, far above the crowd.
And honestly, having a few more interesting transcendents around wasn't a bad thing. As long as they could be used, that is.
I don't quite understand what Mr. Uehara means, Ichigo admitted, scratching his head like a student who hadn't done his homework.
He looked awkward about it.
Still, deep down, Shiroha knew Ichigo had grasped something.
He just hadn't realized it yet. Or maybe he was still clinging to luck, refusing to face reality.
But it was too late for that. The old foxes had already set the game board.
Ichigo had no way out. Shiroha decided to make it even clearer. The power of the Shinigami represents stillness, he repeated. The power of the hollow represents movement. If you only use stillness to suppress movement, you're locking yourself in a lose-lose cycle. He paused, letting the words sink in. Maybe you think it's the best choice. But that's not how the world works. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. If you want to protect something, you have to pay a price. Why could Ichigo, who had integrated 3 powers, ascend to the level of the Soul King's substitute? Because he had found stillness in movement, and movement in stillness. That was the power of a higher realm. But right now, Ichigo feared his hollow power. He was too afraid to move forward. Giving up on evolution meant giving up his future. Losing the initiative. Shiroha wasn't in a hurry, though. He knew Aizen, Kogojinjo, and Yawatch would teach Ichigo that lesson soon enough. After taking a few beatings from reality, Ichigo would eventually figure out that Shiroha's advice was the good kind. He just wasn't ready to hear it yet. Ichigo mulled over Shiroha's words. He felt like he was starting to get it. But at the same time, he didn't want to accept it. Didn't want to accept himself. So, Ichigo awkwardly changed the subject. Then, why did you get stronger, Mr. Uehara? He asked. Was it also to protect the people around you? Shiroha's smile grew wider. Friendlier. That's not it at all, he said cheerfully. I became stronger for a simple reason, so I could bully the weak. He laughed as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. Didn't you see how much fun I was having just now? If you're soft, people will push you around. Fighting is fun. If there was a power that truly transcended everything, why not be Superman? Do whatever you want. Laser eyes optional. Silence. The entire group was speechless. Nobody had expected that kind of answer. But thinking about it, yeah, it fit. It was exactly the kind of thing he would say. And with his strength? He had the confidence to back it up. Lisa pushed up her glasses, wearing an expression like, figures. In her mind, Shiroha and Kayaraku were the same type. They were both weirdos who didn't follow the usual path. Common sense and logic couldn't restrain them. The irony was, she had always done things by the book. Tried to earn merit, follow the rules, climb the ranks the right way. And in the end, look what it got her. A half-human, half-hollow body. Caught between worlds. And even after paying such a heavy price, she still wasn't anywhere close to Shiroha's talent. Maybe that was just life. When Shiroha returned to the Taigun's base, he found Rukia, Ranjiku, and Ora Mishabane enjoying afternoon tea. The atmosphere was relaxed and harmonious. The 3 women each had their own unique charm, but together they were dazzling. Mishabane especially, her figure and grace were almost flawless. Just one look and you could tell she was the type of woman who could bring prosperity to a family. The once naive girl had grown into a stunning, graceful beauty. And yet, her most beautiful and alluring side was something she would only reveal to one person. Sitting beside her, Ranjiku wasn't losing out in the slightest. With her blonde hair and curvy figure, she was just as eye-catching as Mishabane. If Mishabane was elegant, gentle, and intelligent, then Ranjiku was passionate and bold. Both of them were absolute knockouts. Their god-austere figures made Rukia feel more than a little envious. Still, when it came to cuteness, Rukia had them beat. At least, she told herself that. When Shiroha arrived, Ranjiko's eyes lit up with excitement. She immediately started showing off her latest treasures, souvenirs from the human world. Black stockings, lacy-made outfits, nurse uniforms, you name it. As she spoke, she gestured at herself, practically modeling the outfits. Her smile was sweet, her tone innocent, but the temptation behind it was impossible to miss. Mishabane watched with a gentle smile, completely unfazed by the display. She didn't seem embarrassed in the slightest. As long as Shiroha liked it, nothing else mattered. Even if Ranjiku was wearing ordinary clothes, it was enough to stir up dangerous thoughts and maybe even lead to crime or death. And now, with her dressed in these kinds of provocative outfits? It was practically lethal. Sexy and seductive to the point of being dangerous. Hard for anyone to stay in control.
And to make matters worse, sitting beside him was Mishabane. The charming, obedient beauty gazed at him with soft, loving eyes.
Double the temptation. Double the pleasure. Who could resist that? Well, Shiroha could. He was completely unfazed.
For a man who had fought countless battles and faced unimaginable threats, this kind of scene was nothing.
Just another small distraction.
Calm and relaxed, Shiroha held Mishabane in his arms while commenting on each outfit Ranjika showed off, taking his time to enjoy the view. Rukia, who had never witnessed something like this in her life, was frozen in place.
Her whole body went numb.
She shrank her neck in embarrassment, her violet eyes narrowing into cat-like slits, while her ears turned bright red. After a little while, once they'd fooled around enough, Rukia, too thin-skinned to handle it anymore, suddenly bolted.
Not long after, even Ranjiko, who always acted brave and bold, started looking like she wanted to escape. A few days later, in the palace of Los Noches, Aizen was holding a meeting with the 10 Espada. Below his throne, the assembled Arrancar stood silently, along with Jin, Tozen, and a few others, waiting for Aizen's orders. At this time, Ulquiorra and Yami had finally recovered their arms.
But it had taken longer than they'd expected. The wounds left behind by Shiroha's Ryatsu were incredibly tricky. Without Aizen's help, the two of them would have been stuck like broken statues, cosplaying as Venus de Milo.
Grimjow wasn't so lucky. His right arm hadn't regenerated at all.
With his strength significantly weakened, he had lost his qualification to remain among the Espada.
In his place, Luppy Antenor, one of Aizen's reserve Espada, had been promoted to take the rank of Sexta Espada. Both Grimjow and Luppy represented the same aspect of death, destruction.
Both were highly aggressive and combative by nature. But that made it all the harder for Grimjow to accept.
The former Sexta Espada was furious.
He still dreamed of becoming king. And now he was filled with resentment toward Luppy, toward Tozen, and even Aizen. But the situation was beyond his control. For now, all he could do was swallow his anger and wait. After a moment of quiet thought, Aizen gave his orders.
Ulquiorra, you and Yami should be fully recovered by now.
He smiled faintly, resting his chin on one hand.
In that case, go make a scene.
His tone was calm, as if giving instructions for a shopping trip.
This time, I want you to bring Orihime Inoue back here. That girl's ability will be quite helpful to me. With her, we can move the plan forward. Currently, the Hogyoku hadn't fully awakened.
It would take another 4 months for it to reach its perfect fusion state. But Aizen had no intention of waiting that long. Originally, he had another plan in place. But after learning about the nature of Orihime's powers, he decided to make her part of his main strategy instead. His old plan was now the backup. Her Shan-Shan-Rika ability was a perfect match for the Hogyoku's current needs.
Understood, Lord Aizen. Ulquiorra bowed slightly, his voice flat and emotionless. I will not disappoint you.
But deep down, he felt the faintest ripple of confusion.
Orihime Inoue? That woman? Someone that weak can help Lord Aizen? Ulquiorra had been born as a hollow, living deep underground in a cave with his kind.
His people had been pitch black, while he alone was pure white.
Except for his eyes. One day, he left the darkness and stepped into the light of Hueco Mundo's endless night.
His mask cracked. And for a brief moment, he felt something strange, happiness. That was when he understood.
Everything in the world was meaningless.
And knowing that was, in itself, meaningless.
Nothingness was the only true destination.
Anything that the eye cannot see does not exist.
That was his belief. He existed as the very embodiment of nothingness. Things like hearts or bonds?
They had never existed to begin with. Not in his eyes.
With that belief, Ulquiorra had no reason to question Aizen. He accepted Aizen's rule.
He obeyed his orders without resistance.
because to resist was pointless. And Aizen was unbeatable. Following him was the most logical choice.
At the same time, Grimjow, who had been silent until now, suddenly showed a fierce grin. His eyes burned with violent energy.
"I'd been holding back long enough," he sneered. "Time to cut loose. Ichigo, just wait for me." Around them, the other Arrancar grew restless. Some cracked their knuckles. Others clenched their fists in anticipation. They were eager. Hungry. For them, battle and bloodshed were instinct. In the past, they had fought endlessly just to survive, to avoid degeneration. They killed. They devoured. Day after day. Year after year. Now, even though they'd evolved, gained the power of Shinigami, and no longer faced that same danger, their instincts hadn't changed. They still craved combat. They still longed to kill. They were still driven by destruction. But among them, one figure stood out: Wonder Weiss Margila. Unlike the bloodthirsty warriors around him, Wonder Weiss seemed completely out of place. Small and childlike, his dull expression made him look like an ignorant kid. Almost innocent. But appearances were deceiving. Wonder Weiss was known as the fire-extinguishing prince. He wasn't an Espada, but he was Aizen's personal creation. He was the only Arrancar Aizen had further modified with the Hogyoku. Twice. As a result, Wonder Weiss had awakened terrifying abilities, at the cost of his emotions and reason. Aizen didn't mind the trade-off. Before long, the Arrancar opened their black Garganta portals and left the palace of Los Noches. Soon, only 3 people remained: Aizen, Jin, and Tozen. Tozen stood quietly as always. He had long since accepted Aizen's leadership. Right or wrong no longer mattered. There was no turning back for him. But Jin. Jin was still smiling. "Lord Aizen," Jin said lightly. "I don't think the others are a threat to your plan." He opened his eyes a little, the gleam sharp and cunning. "But Shiroha, he's different." Jin's smile never reached his eyes. "It's not going to be easy to snatch someone away while he's watching. Are you sure he won't interfere?" Jin's tone was casual, but his words were pointed. He wanted to know Aizen's true thoughts. The more he understood, the easier it would be for him to act when the time came. At the mention of Uehara Shiroha, Tozen's expression tightened. He frowned, his usual calm cracking ever so slightly. That name brought back bad memories. He had suffered too many humiliating defeats because of that man. It was enough to trigger his PTSD. "I've thought about that," Aizen said calmly, resting his chin on his hand again. His golden eyes gleamed with certainty. "And I've come to a conclusion. Shiroha won't interfere." Jin tilted his head. "So, he wants things to go this way?" Tozen was about to speak, his frown deepening. "Does that mean Shiroha's after the Hogyoku too?" They'd never been able to figure out Shiroha's motives. His strength and goals were complete mysteries. That was why they'd always been forced to act passively around him. But Aizen shook his head. "No," he said. "That's not it." Jin narrowed his eyes further. "It's not that simple, huh? If Shiroha's only goal was the Hogyoku, he wouldn't be so troublesome to deal with. And that was what made him so dangerous." Chapter 143. Sometimes, the answer to a question requires another question. As the seasoned Riddler he was, Aizen kept his true thoughts hidden. He didn't state his conclusions outright. Partly because he wasn't certain yet. He could usually see through most people's thoughts and their hidden cards. But Uehara Shiroha was not one of them. Even so, Aizen was confident. As long as his plan advanced smoothly, there would be no problem. Once he fully integrated with the Hogyoku, everything, including Shiroha, would become clear. At that same time, in the private office of the Captain Commander of the T-Gun, Shiroha's spiritual sense twitched. His observation haki immediately picked up fluctuations in Ryatsu from the human world. He sensed Yami, Grimjow, and Luppy stepping out of a black Garganta, beginning their attack on Karakura town.
Hitsugaya and the others were already prepared for battle. In the Technology Development Bureau, the red alarms blared non-stop.
Sweaty technicians scrambled as alerts popped up on every screen.
They had detected the Espada invasion and lifted the Ryatsu restrictions on the vice-captains and captains.
The Shinigami were confused. It wasn't yet time for the Hogyoku to fully awaken.
Logically, Aizen should have been lying low. But they still prepared for war without hesitation.
Every eye in the Suriitii was now focused on Karakura town.
None of them realized that the invasion was just a smokescreen.
A cover for Aizen's true objective, kidnapping or luring Orihime Inoue. She was set to leave Suriitii and return to Karakura town that very day.
Over the past few days, Orihime had been staying in Seoul society. She'd been helping 4th Division treat the wounded and working on improving her abilities. And now, Aizen had set his sights on her.
Shiroha's observation haki picked up another faint signature. Ulquiorra.
He was hiding in the Garganta, waiting for his moment to act.
Shiroha understood him well.
Ulquiorra wasn't the strongest of the Espada, but his presence in the story was always overwhelming.
That 2-stage resurrection of his?
A masterpiece of menace. In the decisive battle with Ichigo, Ulquiorra's Ryatsu had turned into rain. His entire body had gone pitch black, his form returning to something even more primal.
High above Las Noches, Ulquiorra had spread his bat-like wings, a demon descending from the void.
That was his true 2nd-stage resurrection, a form dripping with dread, pressure radiating from every fiber of his being.
But Shiroha knew something most didn't. That wasn't a move unique to Ulquiorra.
Any hollow, if their Ryatsu was strong enough and they honed themselves for long enough, could develop a final form like that. In truth, the so-called 2-stage resurrection was similar to a Shinigami achieving a secondary form after Bankai. Resurrection and Bankai were both sword releases.
Resurrection was the release of a hollow sealed power, returning to their origin.
Bankai, by contrast, was the Shinigami borrowing strength from the foreign soul residing in their Zanpakuto. Both were parallel paths.
And the 2nd stage of resurrection? It was akin to a Shinigami's ultimate move beyond Bankai.
For example, Yamamoto's Zanka no Tachi had 4 apocalyptic techniques representing the cardinal directions. That was his 2nd-stage Bankai, the final evolution of his sword release.
The absolute limit of what Shinigami and Arrancar could achieve through their weapons.
Beyond that lay only the realm of the transcendent,
where sword and man became one. But for Shiroha, those ultimate moves were just routine.
His base level was a realm most Shinigami spent centuries to reach. And yet, he hadn't found an opponent worth unveiling his 2nd-stage Bankai for.
Not yet. Shiroha was well acquainted with the loneliness of standing at the top.
Still, he was looking forward to seeing Ichigo grow.
And Aizen, once fully fused with the Hogyoku. Hopefully, by then, they'd be strong enough. Because if the fight was over before he even finished warming up, that would be boring. Above Karakura town, the Garganta opened. For Arrancar emerged Yami, Grimmjow, Luppy, and Wonderweiss.
Below, Hitsugaya Toshiro, Madare Mikaku, and Ayasegawa Yumichika immediately looked up, their faces tense.
The last time Grimmjow had invaded, they'd learned firsthand how dangerous the Arrancar were. Even their subordinates had put up fierce fights. And these were Espada. Now, Karakura town wasn't just any battlefield.
It held the lives of hundreds of thousands of people, and the safety of the Soul King itself. They couldn't afford to be careless. They'd been stationed here to guard it, and they were ready. At that moment, Hitsugaya suddenly felt the Kido seal on his Ryatsu lift. His eyes narrowed as he gripped Hyarinmaru with both hands, prepared for combat. The fact that the Technology Development Bureau had responded so quickly meant one thing.
This enemy wasn't ordinary.
They were facing the Espada directly.
In the sky above, Yami grinned as he looked down at the gathered Shinigami. Well, what luck! Ran into some high Ryatsu types right away. Last time, he'd been humiliated.
After losing his arm, he'd taken that failure personally. Since then, he'd been training his sensory abilities.
He never wanted to be caught off guard again.
Not knowing his arm had been sliced off had stung his pride almost as much as the wound itself. Even though he knew full well that Shiroha's strike wasn't something detection skills could do anything about.
Ulquiorra had some of the sharpest sensory abilities among them and he'd still gotten hit. But Yami couldn't accept that. So he kept training. Off to the side, Luppy Antenor, the newly promoted Sexta Espada, curled his lip. So these are the famous Shinigami reinforcements Sexta Espada Grimmjow mentioned? He gave them a once-over and snorted. They don't look like much.
Then, with a mocking smile, he turned toward Grimmjow.
Oops. My mistake. Former Sexta Espada. Luppy was a textbook case of a villain on a power trip. But his arrogance didn't faze Grimmjow in the slightest.
There's no one here I give a damn about, Grimmjow said flatly. Without another word, he turned and flew off. Even without his right arm and with his power cut significantly, he didn't take Luppy seriously. To him, Luppy was just a temporary stand-in.
Trash. Grimmjow only cared about one opponent. Ichigo. Their fight wasn't over. Hey! You little bastard, get back here! Yami bellowed, annoyed by Grimmjow's move. In the world of Arrancar, strength ruled. And technically, Grimmjow wasn't even part of the Espada anymore. He should have been following orders. And Yami?
On the surface, he was number 10.
But in truth, he was number 0. The angry beast. When he released his Resurrection, his power increased exponentially. He believed himself to be the strongest Espada by far. In his mind, everyone else should be following his orders. Even if Grimmjow was still the 6th Espada, which he wasn't, Yami believed he should listen to him. But now Yami was realizing something. This group? Not easy to lead. He sighed, thinking bitterly to himself. This is why Espada teamwork is a damn joke. Anyway, he's not an Espada anymore. He can't do anything. Luppy sneered, watching Grimmjow disappear into the distance. Let him go. If he dies out there, all the better. My position will be secure. He clearly hoped Grimmjow wouldn't be coming back. As far as Luppy was concerned, the less competition, the better. Yami turned his attention to another member of their group. Wonder Weiss, right? He glanced at the blank-faced, yellow-haired Arrancar. Anyone connected to the former Sexta Espada was worth keeping an eye on. But Yami pinned his last hope on Wonder Weiss Margila, who had undergone double enhancement by the Hogyoku. He was curious about this one. Wonder Weiss was unique, the only Arrancar who had been enhanced twice. Maybe he had some hidden skills. But as Yami watched, Wonder Weiss simply stared off into space, entranced by some butterflies fluttering by. He muttered nonsense to himself, completely detached from the situation. TCH. Another freak, Yami muttered, his lip curling in disdain. Forget it. I'll do it myself. It wasn't like Yami was the most reliable guy to begin with. But his so-called subordinates? They were even worse. He didn't expect them to handle anything important anyway. Still, Luppy couldn't resist taking another jab. You say that, but last time you got your ass handed to you. The newly promoted 6th Espada was feeling bold. In his mind, Yami, ranked 10th, was beneath him. So he didn't hold back. I saw it with my own eyes. Your arm got sliced clean off. Even your Ciro was smacked away like nothing. He smirked, cocky as ever. You better be careful. Don't let that arm you worked so hard to regrow get chopped off again. Thanks to Ulquiorra's reports, Luppy had watched recordings of Yami's fight with Ichigo and Urahara. In his opinion, neither of those Shinigami was particularly impressive. And yet, Yami and Ulquiorra both lost their arms to them. Pathetic. And as for Shiroha, that guy was supposed to be something special? In Luppy's mind, Yami and Ulquiorra had gotten away without a scratch. It couldn't have been that bad. But Yami knew better. His gaze sharpened as he glared at Luppy. "Don't worry," Yami growled. "I'm not letting those two walk away this time. I'll kill them both." He spoke with confidence. But deep down, he knew the only reason he could say that was because Shiroha wasn't here. The other Espada had no idea how terrifying that man really was. Aizen had ordered them to seal any information related to Uehara Shiroha. As a result, most of them didn't even understand the threat. But Yami had felt it. That helplessness. That crushing power. Even though he hadn't gone all out during their fight. He couldn't think of any way to break through Shiroha's abilities. And that gnawed at him. He was wary of Shiroha. Even with his ultimate trump card, he still wasn't confident. And in Yami's mind, only the weak felt fear. That made him furious. Unwilling. Frustrated. And the only way he knew how to deal with that was to vent it on the nearest Shinigami. With a massive burst of Ryatsu, Yami launched himself at Hitsugaya and the others. Really impatient, huh? Luppy sighed and followed after him, shrugging as he went. As the only captain present, Hitsugaya didn't hesitate. He took the lead, Hyarinmaru in both hands, and intercepted Yami head-on. The instant their weapons clashed, Hitsugaya felt the pressure. Yami's power and Ryatsu were monstrous. After exchanging a few blows, Hitsugaya confirmed it. These were Espada, true Arrancar elites. And this fight wouldn't be easy. No matter how much information they had, the strength difference was obvious. Hitsugaya, Ikkaku, and Yumichika were struggling. They were simply outmatched. Fortunately, backup arrived in time. Urahara Kisuk. The Espada didn't know what hit them. Urahara dropped in, cheerful as always, and turned the battle on its head. When the Arrancar started using Bala, the hollow bullet technique, Urahara was already prepared. Bala was faster than Zero, 20 times faster, in fact, but weaker in terms of power. If a captain was caught off guard, it could still be deadly. But Urahara wasn't just any captain. He was Karakura's Batman. With a grin under his bucket hat, he pulled out a lifelike artificial body and used it to toy with the Arrancar like it was nothing. Meanwhile, in the underground base, Ichigo was feeling restless. He could sense Grinjao's Ryatsu above Karakura town. And he couldn't sit still anymore. The visor didn't agree with him joining the fight. His holification was still unstable and too short-lived. Jumping into battle now was a bad idea. Even they understood the Espada's power. Ichigo wasn't ready. But Ichigo insisted. He was worried about his friends. He couldn't just sit and watch. Hirako Shinji sighed but eventually gave in. Ichigo's determination was unshakable. When Ichigo finally found Grinjao, he was shocked. Grinjao's arm was missing. They clashed immediately. Ichigo managed to injure Grinjao while in his hollowified state. With Grinjao weakened, it was a one-sided fight. But Ichigo was too polite. Too soft. Grinjao, curious about Ichigo's new form, kept asking questions. And like a good student answering his teacher, Ichigo replied. By the time they finished their lesson, Ichigo's holification had run out. And then Grinjao counterattacked. Still, it wasn't as bad as last time. Shiroha had been watching and was moderately impressed. In the original timeline, Ichigo had gotten stumped once his mask broke. But this time? Not so ugly. Grinjao had taken more damage too. That was the scary thing about Ichigo. The more he fought, the stronger he became. Every battle, especially against powerful opponents, pushed him to grow. Last time, he got beaten to a pulp. But it hadn't been for nothing. His mindset had improved too. At least a little. Shiroha figured Ichigo had listened to him somewhat. But only somewhat. The kid was stubborn. Unless you put a blade to his neck, he didn't resist. And even then, that blade probably had to be pointed at his friends instead. That was Ichigo. The charm of a protagonist and his greatest flaw. As expected, the battle ended with Shinji stepping in. He rescued Ichigo and, with his own holification, took down the already injured Grinjo with ease.
But just as things settled down, the Garganta tore open again. Ulquiorra appeared, calm and composed. "The mission's over," he said quietly to Grinjo and the others.
"Time to go back."
As soon as he spoke, a golden beam of light fell from above.
The negation barrier optimized by Aizen engulfed the Arrancar.
Their bodies slowly lifted into the Garganta, returning to Hueco Mundo.
For now, the Shinigami had won. A temporary victory. But Urahara didn't relax. Something was off. He couldn't shake the feeling he'd missed something.
That they'd made a mistake somewhere. When he returned to the Urahara Shoten, he sat in his private room, deep in thought.
Tessai took the kids to the underground base for training, leaving Urahara with silence.
Under the brim of his striped bucket hat, his eyes grew dark.
Why did the attack come early?
It was rushed.
Sloppy. It made no sense. Aizen wasn't someone who made reckless moves.
Everything he did was calculated.
So why now? Why this? This doesn't add up, Urahara muttered. There's gotta be something else. His instincts screamed it.
There was a trick here.
Something they were missing. There must be a trick. You're right, said a familiar voice. Urahara's head snapped up.
At some point, without him realizing, Uehara Shiroha was standing right in front of him.
Chapter 144. Inside Urahara Shoten, Urahara froze when he saw Shiroha suddenly appear before him.
None of the surrounding barriers or sensing devices had given so much as a warning.
And this wasn't the first time. He'd reinforced his detection barriers countless times already. Layer after layer, including one specifically designed to counter spatial abilities.
And yet, they still didn't work against Shiroha.
Honestly, he wasn't surprised anymore. He was getting used to it. What puzzled him this time was something else. It felt different. Shiroha wasn't just stepping into his shop. He was using a new trick. Urahara adjusted his hat and gave a tentative guess. Latest form of Kido? A new type of spiritual Kido? Mind projection, maybe? He was already certain this Shiroha in front of him wasn't the real body. It was a mental projection. Some kind of spiritual manifestation.
Similar to a Zanpakuto spirit appearing in the physical world, but far more mysterious.
Abilities related to the mind or even the soul were always tricky to deal with.
And this one was no exception.
At first glance, it seemed on par with space manipulation. Maybe even worse. Back when he visited the Soul King Palace, the Hyasub of Squad Zero had demonstrated high-level mental abilities. But even they hadn't shown anything as refined as this. Shiroha's mental projection was something else entirely. Urahara sighed in frustration. He hadn't even cracked Shiroha's spatial abilities yet. And now there was this. What's a god supposed to do? He gave himself a wry smile.
Seeing how quickly Urahara caught on, Shiroha chuckled lightly. You can call it a psychic ghost if you want, but the label doesn't matter. His tone sharpened.
What matters is this Aizen is your problem now.
And you're in big trouble. As Shiroha's power increased, so too did his control over the Mind Gem. To be honest, developing the Infinity Stone's abilities without the Mind Scepter or the Infinity Gauntlet wasn't easy. These stones were literal embodiments of universal laws.
You couldn't control them by conventional means. But Shiroha had managed to advance his abilities anyway.
And with his Ryatsu now at an even higher level, his control over mental energy had evolved.
For example, what he was doing now.
Communicating across worlds with a mental projection.
That was one of his new skills. If he pushed it further, by activating his Bankai, he could even teleport instantly to the projection's location.
That was mental transmission. The Mind Gem allowed him to read the thoughts of all living beings.
True omniscience.
The Shunkyo gave him command over time and space. With it, he could travel thousands of miles in a single step.
Transcend time and space itself.
He was omniscient.
Omnipresent. Omnipotent.
Compared to Yhwach's Almighty, which was little more than an overhyped scam, Shiroha was the real deal.
Hearing Shiroha's warning, Urahara's expression darkened.
So, this was a trap.
He exhaled slowly, thinking aloud. Aizen must have gotten what he wanted.
He'd already suspected as much.
He just hadn't figured out the exact details. But it didn't matter. The result was the same.
They'd lost.
And against Aizen, they couldn't afford to lose.
You've definitely been tricked, Shiroha said calmly.
But don't be too hard on yourself. You did pretty well, considering.
You understood the true nature of Oraheim's powers and knew how important she was. That's why you brought her into Soul Society, to keep her away from Aizen. He gave a small shrug.
But whatever you think of, Aizen can think of too. And now, you're one step behind. Shiroha had to admit, Aizen played this move beautifully.
On the surface, Oraheim seemed like a simple target. But with her abilities, Aizen could shorten the dormant period of the Hogyoku significantly. By capturing her, he turned himself from predator to defender. Now he had a bargaining chip. And Ichigo, along with several Shinigami captains, would have no choice but to come to Hueco Mundo.
By splitting the battlefield, Aizen could control the tempo.
And with Oraheim in his hands, he gained a decisive advantage.
She wasn't just an accessory to his plans. She was key. Urahara had realized this before most. But even he had fallen behind. Urahara's face tightened. He let out a long sigh. All of this. It's because of me.
His voice was heavy with guilt.
If I hadn't created the Hogyoku, none of this would have happened. So many people wouldn't have been hurt. He clenched his fist. Oraheim. Ichigo.
They're going to suffer because of me.
And I can't stop it. He could only watch. Powerless. Shiroha shook his head.
It's too late for regrets. His voice was cold.
And this isn't your only mistake.
You also misjudged the Hogyoku. You thought that, in its dormant state, it couldn't function. So you calculated that Aizen would need several more months to create stronger Arrancar.
But you were wrong.
The Hogyoku only needs to fuse with a few sources of Ryatsu several times stronger than a captain and it'll awaken.
Even if it's just for a brief moment. That's enough to change everything. He looked Urahara in the eye. And now Oraheim has fallen into Aizen's hands. Shiroha's tone turned grave. War is coming. Urahara's scientific ability and intellect were beyond question. That was why people called him Urahara a Dream.
And why, in the human world, he was Karakura's Batman. But his personality had its flaws.
In many ways, Urahara and Yamamoto Genryusai were the same type of man. Both neutral conservatives. Both capable of rewriting the entire system.
And both choosing to preserve the old one instead. Yamamoto had tolerated the corruption of the noble houses for centuries.
Urahara had sealed the Hogyoku as soon as he realized its power might upset the balance of Soul Society. He had no interest in exploring or using the Hogyoku's potential.
And that was his waste of talent. Aizen had seen through him.
And that was why Aizen looked down on him.
Because of that refusal to push beyond his limits.
Urahara had misjudged the Hogyoku.
And as a result, the Shinigami had fallen into a passive position.
I see. Urahara's face was complicated.
It seems I have no choice but to rely on you now, Commander Uehara. The Hogyoku was his greatest creation. And his greatest failure. He understood the terrifying power it held. And how dangerous Aizen was.
But Shiroha laughed softly. Rely on me? Don't kid yourself.
His eyes sharpened.
You don't trust anyone. You can't even trust yourself. That's why you're afraid to study the Hogyoku.
You're scared you'll become like Aizen, someone who destroys the world's order.
How can a man who's suspicious of himself put his hope in someone else? Shiroha's voice was calm. Lie to your comrades if you want. But don't lie to yourself. He didn't think much of these so-called conservatives. He could understand their thinking. But he didn't agree with it. They didn't dare break the status quo. They didn't dare control the Hogyoku.
In the end, it was because they lacked strength
and vision. They didn't have the confidence to face change head-on.
Or the courage to make the world better. Even with all its flaws, they clung to the world created by the Soul King. Worshipping him as a god, afraid to move beyond him. Even Yhwach and Aizen had their hang-ups about the Soul King.
But Shiroha? To him, the Hogyoku was just a tool. The so-called world order and balance were jokes.
Aizen's and Yhwach's grand ambitions were little better than kids playing house. Even the Soul King was nothing more than a strong man who could be surpassed. There were no gods in the sky.
Only himself. Urahara let out a slow breath.
A small, wry smile crossed his face.
As expected. Nothing gets past you, Commander Uehara. Urahara couldn't help but feel both helpless and envious.
Shiroha's intelligence-gathering ability was illogical. But it was never wrong. For someone like Urahara, who relied heavily on intel and analysis in battle, such a skill was priceless.
If he had Shiroha's near omniscience, he would be far more confident in his strategies. His plans would be airtight. His actions, certain. But on the flip side, if you became the enemy of someone like Shiroha, there was no way to fight back. Normally, Urahara's strategy against powerful opponents was simple. Gather information slowly.
Test their abilities carefully.
Adapt tactics on the fly.
Then choose the plan with the highest chance of victory.
That's exactly how he'd planned to deal with Aizen. But facing Shiroha? None of that worked. No amount of probing or strategy could bridge the gap. There was no logic to it.
And that was exactly why it was useless. Even so, Shiroha said, his expression unreadable.
You'll have to walk the rest of the way yourselves. With that, he ended his warning.
As far as he was concerned, he'd done his part.
He expected Urahara to give up on any delusions now. No more relying on luck. No more gambling on borrowed strength. Shiroha knew perfectly well that Urahara had wanted to use him.
He'd hoped to pit Shiroha against Aizen, to let them clash and eliminate each other. That's why he'd so readily agreed to join forces and acted like they were on the same side.
Wishful thinking. Nothing more. Shiroha wasn't stupid.
He wasn't about to get cocky just because he was powerful. And he sure as hell wasn't going to charge into battle just because he smelled an opportunity.
The world was full of old foxes. Anyone who rushed in first was either a fool or cannon fodder. Shiroha knew he was invincible.
But he wasn't about to stand in front like a hero and take the brunt of everything.
Let the tools go first. Let them expose the enemy's trump cards.
Then he'd swoop in and clean up.
That was the right rhythm. Urahara sighed, resigned. If things go south,
please be ready to step in, Commander Uehara. He didn't have Shiroha's confidence. And he sure didn't have his composure.
Facing someone like Aizen put tremendous pressure on him.
Even with his plans running smoothly, his chances were barely 50-50.
And now, he didn't even have that. At this point, he wasn't trying to drag Shiroha into the fight anymore. He just hoped Shiroha wouldn't become an enemy. Because if he did,
the entire world would be in danger. We'll see, Shiroha said with a shrug.
As far as he was concerned, he'd already warned them. Put pressure on them. That was enough. If things went wrong, it was their problem. Not his.
Whether the balance of the three realms collapsed or the old order was destroyed,
he didn't care. It wasn't his responsibility. Later, Yukitake eventually received news from two surviving Shinigami guards.
Orihime Inoue had been kidnapped by the Aaron car as she passed through the Senkaman Gate.
The news quickly reached Ichigo and Hitsugaya in Karakura town. And then the order came down from Yamamoto Genryusai Shigakuni himself.
Compared to the safety of Soul Society, the life of one human is insignificant, the old man said coldly.
Return to Soul Society immediately. War is coming. The top priority is the protection of Soul Society. Hitsugaya and the others were reluctant. They didn't want to follow the order. But they had no choice. The Espada's recent attacks had put enormous pressure on Soul Society.
And compared to the Soul King and the stability of the three realms, Orihime's life would have to wait.
Meanwhile, on a hidden hillside somewhere in Soul Society, Shiroha stood silently. He stared at the empty air before him. But what appeared as nothing to others was something entirely different in his eyes. With his all-seeing gaze, he watched soul fragments dance on the wind. Tiny blue specks fell like snowflakes, drifting across Soul Society. Several of them landed on him. And in an instant, his mind gem activated, burning them away like sunlight melting frost. Shiroha casually brushed off his spotless white coat and spoke softly. "Hello there. King of the Quincy. Yawatch." When he saw those soul fragments, Shiroha knew exactly what was happening. Yawatch had made his move. Or rather, this was a test. A rehearsal for the 1,000-year blood war. The King of the Quincy had just awakened from his long slumber. His strength hadn't fully returned yet. So he was acting carefully. Cautiously. Spreading those fragments throughout Soul Society was his way of stirring up conflict. Fanning the flames of war from the shadows. Yawatch was known as the son of the Soul King. The progenitor of the Quincy. The supreme ruler of the Wandenrake, the invisible empire. And he bore the sacred letter A. The symbol of Almighty. Omniscient and omnipotent. His abilities were no joke. Even Shiroha had no interest in direct contact with those soul fragments. Not unless he had to. Sure, he had the universal barrier and the mind gem. He could probably purge the corruption if it came down to it. But why take the risk? He was already invincible by staying alive. There was no need to gamble. And besides, the quest system's rewards were more reliable than anything Yawatch's scraps could offer. But still, the abilities hidden within those soul fragments were valuable. Very valuable. As Shiroha watched the fragments, his mind worked quickly. Analyzing their secrets. Dissecting their mysteries. The power to manipulate Reisher and Blut was basic Quincy ability. That was the foundation. But the Quincy had more. They could awaken special powers. The sacred letters. And beyond that lay the Volstandig, or perfected holy form. In other words, the sacred letters were like Shirkai. The Volstandig was equivalent to Bankai. And Yawatch? His letter A stood for Almighty. Omniscience and omnipotence. But his so-called omniscience was focused on the soul. His fundamental ability was the manipulation of souls. Soul distribution. Soul recovery. Stealing Shinigami Bankai. Granting sacred letters. The stern Ritter. Even the bestowal of his power through Oswalin. It all stemmed from his power over souls. Even his eyes of the Almighty were part of that. They weren't about controlling the future. They were about absolute control over the soul. Of course, activating this ability required strength. An unparalleled level of strength. Only when Yawatch reached his peak could he fully open those eyes and activate true omniscience and omnipotence. Right now? Still recovering. His eyes were shut. But even so, Yawatch was terrifying. Ordinary transcendence couldn't handle him. Because in every world, powers tied to the soul were dangerous. And incredibly hard to deal with. Take Orochimaru from Naruto. Soul transfer, rebirth, death manipulation. Disgusting, but effective. Voldemort from Harry Potter. Horcruxes, fragments of soul spread everywhere. A cockroach you couldn't squash. Big Mom in one piece. Her soul fruit turned her into a nightmare. And Yawatch? He made them all look like amateurs. His soul abilities were on par with God's. When he was still a baby, those around him found something strange. If you touched him, your ailments vanished. You grew stronger. But the baby didn't benefit from this. He couldn't take back what he gave. And that was how it all began. Chapter 145. Whether it's physical defects, lack of strength, or even a lack of emotions, all of them can be compensated for. The only flaw is that those who gain power this way usually won't live long. Even so, they still worship the vegetative state Yawatch as a god. Why? Because in the world of the dead, the soul is the foundation. The body here is just a shell. That's why you rarely see people with congenital defects in the soul society. Even if someone was deaf, blind, or missing limbs in the world of the living, once they cross over, their souls are restored, and they become like any ordinary person. The reason is simple: their souls are intact. People like Tozen are rare. The soul carries everything: Ryatsu, talent, memory, emotion, ability, you name it. So if a defect exists in the soul itself, no amount of physical healing can fix it. But if you make up for a flaw in the soul, all deficiencies, whether physical, emotional, mental, or spiritual, can be fixed. And Yawatch's ability, soul sharing, does exactly that. He was born with the power to give out fragments of his soul to anyone who comes into contact with him. If you get one of Yawatch's soul fragments, you gain power, cover up your own flaws, and forge a connection with him. That's the essence of soul sharing. In a way, Tozen chose the wrong side. If this poor guy had picked the Quincy instead of the Shinigami, he could have easily regained his sight. And he could have fought the Shinigami fair and square without turning into a monster or suffering through endless guilt and torment. Because of this, Yawatch's followers call him God. But it's a shame. This so-called Holy King of the Quincy, who talks about peace and purity, isn't a selfless god or an angel of light, he's a demon who deals in souls. Soul sharing sounds beautiful on the surface, but it's actually high-interest loan sharking. And worse, it's forced. The more you use the power from Yawatch's soul fragments, the deeper the debt you owe. The heavier the price. And when you die, Yawatch collects. He takes back everything in your soul: your Ryatsu, your experience, your abilities, your knowledge, your vitality, and even your soul itself. It's basically signing a contract with the devil. Sure, you get stronger for a while. But in the end, you'll be bled dry. And one day, your soul might scatter into nothingness. What makes this ability terrifying is that it doesn't matter whether you're willing or not. As long as you come into contact with one of Yawatch's soul fragments, the link is made. Then, whether you like it or not, when you die, your power, and even your soul, belongs to him. It's a total shakedown. This ability is how Yawatch grew from a blind, deaf, paralyzed baby into the king of the Quincy. But there's a catch. He has to keep giving out soul fragments and absorbing the power of others, or else he'll revert to his weak, helpless state. He might even die of exhaustion. In other words, Yawatch gets stronger the older he gets, but only as long as he keeps feeding on other souls. And that's not even the worst part. If Yawatch gives out a larger soul fragment, through engraving or blood inheritance, he can completely control the distribution of power among his subordinates. Vitality, Ryatsu, you name it. He can adjust it however he likes. And if he wants to, he can recall those soul fragments anytime he pleases. He can collect his debts early. That's sanctification. This is true for all Quincy, including the Sternritter and the Schutzstaffel. And because of this, through the Oswallen, holy selection, Yawatch can forcibly drain all power from half-blood Quincy and bestow it on others. He can even use the holy selection to resurrect dead Schutzstaffel members. Or strip them of everything, including their lives and powers. In short, his subordinates are just batteries and toys to Yawatch. They have no say in the matter.
He can mold them however he wants. And now, Yawatch has scattered soul fragments throughout the Soul Society.
It's obvious why he's laying the groundwork for the coming war.
For the 1,000-year Blood War. When the time comes, all the dead Shinigami and Quincy will become his property. Their powers will feed him. And with that, he can fully restore himself and reopen his almighty eyes, the eyes of the Almighty.
Not a bad little scheme.
The leader of the Quincy has definitely gotten smarter after being kicked around by life. Thousands of years ago, even after the monk, Ichibai, sealed his eyes of the Almighty with the Soul King's arm, Yawatch didn't back down. He still led a horde of Quincy to slaughter the Soul Society. And then he got stomped by Genryosei Yamamoto, who was practically dancing on piles of Shinigami corpses. Yawatch's ashes were nearly scattered to the wind. The sly monk Ichibai, the godlike old Chojiro, and ruthless old man Yama all taught the young Quincy king a brutal lesson.
Kindness and honesty don't win wars.
In this world, nice guys get shot first.
Since then, Yawatch learned to keep his head down, bide his time, and build his empire in silence.
He also learned not to treat his subordinates like cannon fodder, for a while, anyway. But even with his incomplete eyes of the Almighty and his soul-sharing ability, none of that works on Shiroha.
No matter how clever Yawatch's plan is, he's got no answer for him. Not yet. At this stage, Yawatch is still too weak.
Things will get interesting once Yawatch absorbs the Soul King's power.
But by then, Shiroha should already have the completed Hogyoku.
And after that, he can wrap up a few special missions. When the time comes, he'll make sure to give Soul King Yawatch one hell of a surprise. Thinking about that bright future, Shiroha still kept his focus on the present. He used his perfected observation haki to continue studying the soul fragments floating in front of him. They looked small, but each one contained a trace of rule power, potentially infinite possibilities. The Yawatch inside Ichigo's inner world was actually a manifestation of these soul fragments.
He was also the embodiment of Quincy power.
By analyzing the rule power within the fragments, Shiroha gained a deeper understanding of the secrets behind the transcendent realm and the eyes of the Almighty. In the world of the dead, the evolution of powers and forms is ultimately the evolution of the soul.
Some powers might seem invincible, but they're still limited by the user's Ryatsu and soul strength.
They all have their caps.
If you want to evolve your abilities, you have to strengthen your soul.
But whether you're Shinigami or Hollow, your soul strength has a limit.
Once you hit that ceiling, you stagnate. You can't grow anymore. That bottleneck is determined by both race and talent.
Therefore, their Ryatsu and abilities also have limits. Only when the soul evolves to a higher level can those limits be broken. The power that breaks those limits is the power of the transcendent, the power of rules. And once you evolve your soul and abilities to that stage, you're overwhelmingly powerful compared to lower-level beings.
It's a dimensional gap and absolute advantage in strength that's nearly impossible to cross.
At this point, the only thing that could possibly threaten Shiroha is transcendent power.
Normal Shinigami Bankai or Quincy Script abilities can't hurt him at all.
That said, there are still a few special methods in the world of the dead to reach transcendent level power. The simplest method is becoming the host of one of the Soul King's body parts.
For example,
Mimihagi, who is in Yukatate, who possesses the Soul King's right arm. Gerard Valkyrie, who holds the Soul King's heart. And there's always individual talent or unique abilities. Like Aizen, who was a weak Shinigami but transcended by merging with the Hogyoku. Or Yawatch, who used his soul sharing to stack the power of the Almighty to transcendent levels. Similarly, Shiroha can rely on the attribute points he earns from daily tasks to stack his powers, evolving his soul beyond the limits of Shinigami and Hollow alike. Once the soul evolves, it can carry more abilities, stronger ones, far beyond anything a captain from the 1,000-year Blood War could comprehend. And life itself becomes nearly immortal.
This is the true secret of the transcendent.
After finishing his observation, Shiroha reached out and crushed the remaining soul fragments floating around him. Meanwhile, in the shadows of Soul Society, a massive palace stood quietly. Surrounded by ice, it was the ice palace of the Wandenrake. The stronghold of the Quincy. The base Yawatch built to honor his homeland. He had grown up surrounded by ice and snow. That was his birthplace, and it shaped him. In that harsh land, he broke through his limitations step by step. First, he saw the world. Then, he heard its voices. Eventually, he saw the future, and took control of it. Omniscience and omnipotence became both his greatest ability and his deepest wish. No one understood better than Yhwach how terrifying and desperate it was to be trapped in the dark. So after waking from his long sleep, he resolved to eliminate all hidden threats. He would bring an end to death and darkness. And to do that, sacrifices and war were necessary. At this moment, Yhwach frowned. His thoughts darkened. The soul fragments I released were destroyed? He narrowed his eyes. Yamamoto? He shook his head. No. He doesn't have that ability. The eyes of the Almighty? He paused, then growled, Hayasubichibe. You're courting death. This was too much. I've already died once. What more do you want? Sealing me with my father's hand wasn't enough? Now you want to kill me too? I'll kill you sooner or later. In the Ice Palace, Jugram Hashwolf stood below Yhwach's throne. He immediately noticed the change in Yhwach's expression. Bowing slightly, he asked, Your Majesty, has something happened? Is there anything we can do for you? Several other stern Ritter also noticed. Yhwach was omnipotent, omniscient, always calm. But this was the first time they'd ever seen such a clear shift in his mood. Yhwach, who had already regained his composure, waved them off. Don't worry, he said disapprovingly, it's just the powerless struggle of a few weak fools. They're trying to stop us from moving forward, but they'll fail. You know, I hate war. More than anyone, I long for peace. His tone darkened. But those rats hiding in the shadows don't deserve the light. There's no place for them in the world to come. 1,000 years ago, Hayasubichibe had come to him with the Soul King's left arm. Yhwach used the Almighty to look into it. But he didn't see the real future, he only saw the true form of his father. At that moment, Yhwach realized, the Almighty couldn't see through anything related to the Soul King's remains. That was when he finally understood the truth about the world, and about the Soul King. This so-called God was nothing more than a remnant, sealed in crystal. Barely alive. And that pitiful remnant was being manipulated by a snake like Ichibe. How pathetic. Your Majesty, your will guides our swords. Leelbaro, captain of the Schutzstaffel, bowed slightly, his face resolute. Yhwach continued, I can hear them, the cries of the souls returning to me. Their resentment. Their pain. They're begging, they're terrified. They don't want to die. They're afraid. He clenched his fist. This world is wrong. It's ugly. It needs to be fixed. Ever since he first laid eyes on the miserable state of his old father with the Almighty, Yhwach had been completely disillusioned. The Soul King had sacrificed everything to maintain balance for thousands of years. And what had he gotten for it? Nothing. Just a cage filled with death, pain, fear, and resentment. So Yhwach made up his mind. He would destroy this world. He would kill death itself. And free his father. As Yhwach's other half, Jugram Hashwolf understood him. He knew everything about the Soul King. And he understood Yhwach's complicated feelings toward him. But even so, Hashwolf still had doubts. He hesitated for a moment, then asked, Your Majesty, there's something I don't understand. Why isn't Yamamoto listed as one of the special war potentials? As leader of the Gotei 13, Yamamoto's power couldn't be ignored. In terms of pure destruction, Ryujin Jaka was almost unmatched. With such a dangerous Zanpakuto and Yamamoto's strength, he was far from ordinary. On the other hand, Ichigo Kurosaki and Kenpachi Zaraki didn't seem that dangerous. It was hard to imagine how those two could have more impact on their plans than Yamamoto. Jugram knew Yhwach must have had a reason. But he wanted to hear it. The other stern Ritter were curious too, though not as much. To them, the holy letters and Volstandig made them invincible. The Special War Potentials list felt more like a ranking of bounty targets or military achievements.
How strong could some old man really be?
With the medallion that could steal a Shinigami's Bankai, even the strongest captain was no threat.
No Shinigami could defeat them. Yawatch looked toward the distant Sun Gate. He spoke softly, because I can see Yamamoto's future. It's a sad one.
He's old. His heart, his sword. They've gone soft. All that awaits him now is death.
Even if the Almighty wasn't fully restored yet, Yawatch could still catch glimpses of the future. He just couldn't change them.
But what he saw was always true.
And that's why he considered Kenpachi Zaraki, Ichigo Kurosaki, and Keisuke Urahara to be the real threats.
They were the variables. If those three were removed, his victory would be absolute.
As for Shiroha,
he was the strangest one of all.
Yawatch couldn't see any future involving him.
As if the man didn't exist in the future at all. If it were anyone else, Yawatch would assume they died early, which is why they had no future.
But Shiroha?
That man wouldn't die so easily.
Mystery was his synonym.
And it was also his greatest power. That wraps up this part of What If Transmigrated in Bleach World.
Thanks so much for listening.
As always, new parts drop every 4 days, so be sure to stay tuned. Also check out my Patreon channel for early releases of all the series, where you can find all the series released one day ahead of YouTube. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and please consider supporting the original author as well.
See you in the next one.